What is the craziest encounter of rich kid syndrome you've experienced? My friend is a commercial pilot and works for a large company that has a flight department consisting of several jets and turboprop airplanes. The owner's kids and a group of their friends were granted permission to take one of the jets from the central part of the US to the Bahamas. Upon arriving in the Bahamas, they were meeting other friends and getting on a very, very large yacht for a week. They realized that the yacht was equipped with fine dining food, not the type of food they liked. They preferred junk food. They ordered the pilots to fly back through U.S. customs and to their hometown in the Midwest. Once there, they had to pick up multiple sides of barbecue ribs, burgers, hot dogs, soda, beer, and piles of other junk food, and fly back to the Bahamas, and do so within a time frame that still allowed them to leave with the yacht on time. It costs roughly $5,000 an hour to operate the jet they were using, and it never even struck the owners as something extreme. Edit. Due to the popularity of this post, I called and got clarification on several points that have been repeatedly questioned. The barbecue, ribs, pulled pork, and sauce was the main purpose of the return trip to the Midwest. If you're from the Midwest or a southern barbecue city, you know what I'm talking about. They don't have this in Florida, period. The other junk food was add-on requests from other guests. The plane owner's son had promised in the months prior to bring some of the barbecue he had told his other friends about repeatedly throughout college. He forgot and was catching hell for it. In an act of boldness, he sent the plane back for it. This is the most extreme example of how these planes are used and wealth flaunted within this company. That's with the understanding that wife shopping trips, sending a plane back to pick up a kid after school to come to Florida, ball games, hunting and fishing trips, and to dine in a restaurant 3,000 miles away is commonplace. On occasion, these planes and pilots have been used as angel flights, transporting ill children and family throughout the country for medical procedures. The pilots for this company aren't paid the best, but are permitted to bring family, spouses, mostly, to destinations, as space and work schedule dictates. Some senior pilots can stay at the company-owned property nationwide if available. Story 2. Twins in high school. Birthday. I think it was the 17th. They get matching pickup trucks, like the souped-up, larger-than-life, cool-as-hell-looking black ones. Twin A is the brat, and he smashes his in some remarkable time frame, I want to say same day. It was crazy, though. Parents decide not to get him another one, though I'm sure insurance probably covered it even if it was his fault, but regardless, he's going to learn a lesson. The lesson? Take Twin B's truck, he's the responsible one, and crash it on purpose. If he can't have one, neither can his brother. So much recklessness, spite, and downright illegal in what he did. Not sure if he went to prison. I do know he wasn't at school the next year, but he very well could have just dropped out. He was pretty sketchy. Twin B was actually a really good guy, but as soon as his brother was gone, he became very quiet. He did eventually get some sort of car, but I remember it was much more toned down. I can't even remember what it looked like, but he got something. There weren't many other rich kids at the school, so this whole story stuck out as a huge event when it happened. Story 3. A long time ago, I was dating a rich girl. Not insane rich, but rich enough. Well, I'm from Norway, and we have a recycling system for plastic bottles. You get like 10 cents per bottle. Her family had a literal mountain of empty bottles and crates in their warehouse. They had a warehouse. I asked her dad, what are you gonna do with these? To which he replied something like, oh, these are from our employees' staff party a couple years back. I just haven't had the time to get rid of them. Logically, I told him I'd recycle them for a percentage. He said, keep it all, guy. So I did. I had to do multiple trips to several different stores, but it ended up being like $1,300, which is insane money for me at the time. I bought a guitar. I realize now it's not a crazy story, but for me, it was insane to earn that much for 4 to 5 hours of work, all because her family couldn't be bothered to do it. Edit. Some wanted to know what guitar I got. It was a Jagmaster. I know. Luckily, I spent the rest on rent and weed. I was 20 or 21, so there you go. I was a catch. OP, what do you mean it's not crazy? Like, the others are like, you'd expect rich people to do that sort of thing, or at least to hear a story of a rich person doing that sort of thing. $1,300 of recyclable bottles? I don't know, it catches my attention. That's cool as hell. Doing some good for the planet? Getting paid while you're at it? Nice work, OP. Story 4. As a kid, I was poor. Like, we had no money and barely kept the lights on. My mother did an awesome job, even worked 2 different jobs and went to night school at one point to make a better future for us. I grew up without a lot of things, but it taught me a lot about what you really need in life. A a roof over your head, and food in your belly. Everything after is a plus, really. I had a lot of friends who were way better off than me, but one kid in particular had everything. He was a Jehovah's Witness, so didn't do birthdays or Christmas, but would often just get stuff to kind of make up for it. At times, he would complain to his mother for buying him something that he thought was crap or wasn't the right model or something, despite getting loads of stuff which was awesome all the time. He was the kind of kid that had all the games, consoles, and toys in the world, but would moan about it. One of the last times I hung out with him, he was shouting at his mother because she had promised him she would buy him a new guitar. He was learning, but the time of day had gotten late and she wasn't able to go. Like it was when all the stores were closed, so literally impossible. The kid just kept chewing her out because of it, and he was speaking to her like she was some kind of moron. It was painful to watch, and I was like 14 at the time. I stopped hanging out with him after that. I later heard his mother cracked and had enough of him and kicked him out of the house. He ended up being a shoplifter and lived in the local YMCA for a bit. In fairness, I think he's back on track now, but as a kid, he was a bit of a jerk to his parents. Story 5. Not scathing like most of the ones here. I grew up attending a private school in a developing country, so a lot of my classmates were in the 1% of the country. Whenever we'd be swimming in the school pool, one friend of ours in particular would always remark that swimming is more fun if the pool has a current or waves, to which I had no idea what he was talking about, generally thinking he was just being imaginative. One day he invited me over to his house for swimming, and he had a 50-foot indoor pool that generated a current and waves. And hey, he wasn't lying. They're a lot more fun. Story 6. I wouldn't call him a friend, more of an acquaintance. He's not rich anymore, but he grew up with hella rich parents. Super spoiled, did drugs and drank all the time till he was 25-ish, then got kicked out. Nowadays, he lives on my buddy's couch, but he's a nice enough guy. But he tends to get trashed, and when he's trashed, becomes a jerk. Breaks things, usually accidents, sometimes on purpose, gets real nasty, sometimes starts physical fights. I don't know how my friend deals with it. He is slowly learning the value of $1. Before he would wreck his car his parents bought him and completely shrug it off because they would just buy him a new one the next week. Nowadays, he's at least a bit more financially aware, even if he does blow all of his money on liquor. Edit. I don't know how I forgot to mention this, but he's also been arrested like 4 separate times, mostly for public intoxication. One such occasion was at like 3 a.m. when he was banging on the windows of a closed Taco Bell, and the cops got called on him after he tripped the alarm somehow. And he's still trashed in his mugshot, but smiling as if he just won $1 million. The dude is an enigma. Consequences are all but lost on him. Makes for some funny stories, I suppose, though. Story 7. I was in a theology class where we were talking about compromise. Teacher: what are some compromises your parents have made? Very rich girl: my mom wanted to go to Hawaii and my dad wanted to go to Mexico, so we went to the Bahamas instead. Going to private school makes life full of these stories. Like earlier this week when I asked why this girl who I sat by was gone. Her friend then told me, she's skipping this week because she wanted to go to the Bruno Mars and Pitbull concert in Hawaii. Or another one last year, this girl got too stressed out with school, so she went to Lithuania with her dad for a month. I have no idea how she made up all her schoolwork. Story 8. One of my coworkers, kind of not really friends, years ago made a comment that stuck with me as the most out-of-touch thing I've ever heard anyone say in person. I mean, who trusts Portuguese cleaning people? There are layers of entitlement and snoot in there, but the thing is that he was complaining about legitimate and relatable, my parents hate me and blame me for everything things. His parents really did blame him for whatever the cleaning team broke. I'm still not sure how to feel about it. He had legitimate hardships I can understand, expressed from a frame of reference that I cannot. Story 9. When I worked at a gas station in my early 20s, it was the hangout spot for spoiled teens to show off their new cars, try to steal beer, but generally just hang out. Anyway, one dude turned 16 and his parents bought him a brand new sports car. Don't ask me what it was, it just looked really expensive. By the next weekend, he had totaled the car trying to show off and do donuts in the intersection the gas station was on, and he slammed right into a pole. He was fine, but car demolished. Where's karma when you need her? Within 2 weeks, this idiot already had a brand new car. He would brag about how his parents were so stupid, and he's already looking to upgrade when the new model came out. No regard for the money his parents shelled out. No regard for the possible lives he put in jeopardy with his reckless driving. I wanted to throttle him. Story 10. My parents bought me a laptop for my 18th birthday. It was absolutely unheard of in my family to receive gifts as expensive or technological. I cried when my mom handed it to me. I was meant to be moving away for university, and both my mom and dad had saved up 6 months' wages between them to afford it. We all hugged and cried, and it was extremely meaningful and emotional. I went off to university. I was in the dorms one night when my dorm mate, who was a rich white boy from Long Island, brings back like 2 drunk girls and another friend. They start drinking and rolling up weed in the dorm, which I was fine with. I mean, it was university. I go to the bathroom down the hall, and when I get back, one of the drunk girls has opened my laptop and is trying to log in. I approach her and I'm like, hey, that's my laptop, not my roommate's. I don't mind you using it, I guess, but let me log you into the guest account. She goes to move the laptop off her lap toward me and knocks an open bottle of wine onto it, the entire laptop being flooded with wine. She goes, "Oh, sorry." I'm like, what the hell, dude? Get a freaking towel. Put it upside down. I'm freaking the hell out. I can't believe it's happening. My roommate starts telling me to chill out, dude, and can't you just get a new one? I start patting down the laptop and I ask them, please, if it doesn't work, can you help me replace it? I need it for my classes. They start laughing at me. They just ask, why can't your parents get you a new one? It took 2 weeks of demanding them to buy me a new one before they reluctantly did, as I had to explain to the dorm manager my situation of my family being extremely poor and it being unbelievable that they were even able to get me into university, let alone a new laptop. Luckily, he was sympathetic and helped me arrange for a replacement. But man, that moment of can't you just get a new one made my heart blow up. It was more painful than the laptop getting damaged itself. I looked at him and wanted to murder him. I'd never experienced rich kid syndrome as succinctly before or since. I hated that guy. Story 11. I had a scholarship to private school for my secondary education. We were by no means poor, but compared to the people who were paying full school fees, I was a peasant. The vast majority of the students were wealthy, and about half of them were spoiled little brats. Most of the kids got given cars for their 17th birthday in anticipation of passing their driving tests. One boy in particular in my year had a September birthday, so was one of the first to take his test. He had a huge house and garden, so he already knew how to drive. On the day he passed his test, he got dropped off back at his school with his shiny new sports car. I don't know what type it was, I don't care about cars, but everyone seemed impressed. He picked up a couple of friends to go for a spin, and before he got 100 meters up the road, completely wrecked it. His dad bought him a new one the next day, and he complained it was the wrong color. I just wish when money were wasted like this, it would go to people who needed it more. Like companies who sell luxury sports cars, they're already doing all right for the most part, I would imagine at least. I guess I don't know that for sure. But like, man, what a disgusting waste of money, let alone the resources for the car and everything else. And yeesh, complaining about the color of the new one? Oh boy, you better hope you don't have to work a day in your life, buddy. Story 12. I actually have a bit of a different story than most of these. Met a friend in Econ 101 on my first day. Pretty humble kid and all around good guy. We got along well and were in the same study group. Turns out kid's dad owned like a supermarket chain in Hong Kong, and his mom is a managing director at a hedge fund on mainland China, and they were loaded. He never let it show though, and I only found out after about 3 to 4 months of knowing him. His parents put him in boarding school when he was a kid, but he said it was actually pretty tough since the school gave zero craps about privilege. Classes were like 1 teacher to every 3 kids, and they were hardcore. They eventually sent him overseas for high school in this really upscale place in North Carolina for 4 years. He was one of the most well-mannered kids I knew in college and super humble. Got straight A's throughout college and made me pay attention too, since I was prone to slacking. I ended up doing an internship in my junior year with his mom's fund, and she wrote me a letter of recommendation later on to help me get a job. We still keep in touch occasionally, and he's working for a bank in Hong Kong, pretty much following his mom's footsteps. Still comes by New York to visit every year, and we usually have dinner with our SOs. It's really weird because I see these kids at school driving Audis and BMWs, and this kid is just there to study like everyone else, even though his parents might be the most loaded people I've seen at the school. Story 13. When I was enlisted, I worked with a dude that was heir to an orange juice empire. Chillest guy I knew. He wasn't the problem, he was awesome. When we were overseas, he realized that the BXPX and bank had slightly different rates between the local currency, and he worked some 4x magic between the two to get a little extra spending money. The next guy I worked with was the worst. Completely clueless. He complained about how he couldn't get a satellite signal on his houseboat, so he had to watch DVDs on vacation. These things weren't cheap at the time. And then we found out his mom was coming on base to clean his room. We found out that because his roommate was black and his mom was super racist, she called the cops, so there's that too. That was a fun conversation. Edit. I'll add, the kid wasn't all bad. His plan for his enlistment bonus was to put it in a CD and then use the CD as collateral for a car loan. That way at the end he would still have his money and a car. I was all right on. And then he pulls this crap. You were the chosen one. And then he wasn't. Story 14. These stories make my blood pressure rise. So to give your eyes a break, I'm going to share one of a good rich kid, although it may not be welcome, which is understandable. This person doesn't have rich kid syndrome, it's just a rich kid story. So generally, rich kids don't mind spending their parents' money. When I first met this guy, I assumed he was poor, like me, or at most, average. He wore the same shirt and pants most days of the week pretty much, didn't drive an overly expensive car, a Honda Fit, etc. Eventually, we started going on dates and we went to pizza houses, Chinese restaurants, etc. Very cheap, super low-key, no sign of him being loaded at all. He's an international student, and one day after we got to know each other better and were already dating for a while, he started talking about how he's not allowed to work in this country. He looked like he was hinting at something, and then asked me if I knew how he was going to school here. Since I had not been close to an international student before, I just assumed they used their savings, worked their way through it, or took out a loan. Wow, I feel poor now. Then I think about it more. He has an apartment to himself, goes to school full-time, an expensive one at that, bought a brand new car when he came here a couple of years back. Wait, how is he affording all of this? Then he dropped that he was rich, and his father pays for everything. I kinda just said, okay, and forgot about it, because I actually kinda didn't believe him, but he thought I did. We never talked about it again. Fast forward a couple of months, and he says he needs help with something on his bank statement and asks me if I could help him. Of course, I agreed, and he showed me his bank statement. Y'all, when I saw the numbers, I almost fell over. I asked him where he got all of this money, and he just said, I told you, from my dad. Then very lightly and nonchalantly tells me later on that his father is one of the top 200 richest people in his entire country with a population of about 51 million. To say I was shook was an understatement, but looking at him, you would never know. Some days he actually slightly resembles a homeless person. Sorry, babe, if you're reading this. It's only the days when you don't shower. That being said, he never buys anything, and I mean anything he doesn't need. He buys food, gas, pays for rent, and electricity. That's it. I have to force him to buy new clothes if I think he needs them, and I have to let him know that sometimes spending money is necessary for fun. He always shops from outlet stores and would never pay more than $15 for jeans, and he has explicitly said that any shirt over $10 is not a shirt he would like to own. He let his hair grow halfway down his back because he didn't want to spend $30 to get it cut. He was actually growing it out to donate it, but he never realized he would have to spend money to have someone cut it. I ended up buying some supplies to cut it for him at home. I just think it's a little crazy that they're technically his dad, is that loaded, but he doesn't buy anything. His dad would let him, for sure, and he's expressed that, but he just doesn't want to. To put things into perspective, I have $2 and will spend every penny of it on whatever makes me happy at the time. And this man's dad casually sent him $100K the other day for his basic life expenses for the year. My dude doesn't spend an unnecessary penny. He's admirable. He really is. He is the most down-to-earth person I've ever met, and he happens to be the most loaded person I will most likely ever meet. I sometimes think he's a little too frugal, but we keep our accounts separate so it doesn't bother me. Also, he views his money he uses as his dad's money, not money that he has earned the right to use. I hope that if I ever have children, I can teach them to be this responsible and respectful. You know what, OP? A break from all of the rich kid syndrome? Not bad. Much appreciated. Thank you. This guy sounds pretty great, I gotta be honest. And there is some truth in what people say. Those who have a lot of money show it. Those who have a lot of money don't. For the most part, at least. Story 15. Grew up wealthy. Lived in a large house in a nice area. Went on nice vacations once a year and flew across country to see family at least once every 2 years. I didn't have any real concept of money growing up. My friends all come from different backgrounds due to the school I attended, but I never put much thought into why friend A lived in a small apartment where they shared a bedroom with their sibling, and I had my own bedroom with a private bathroom in a big house in the suburbs. Hell, our father joined a country club, though we weren't very active in it. I figured it out sometime in high school. Anyway, my younger brother didn't quite get the memo. I was talking to him one day and comparing something to the size of our house. He said in a very serious tone, "Our house is small. We're poor." I really didn't know how to respond to that. Years later, at almost 30, he still thinks the same. The best I can come up with is compared to some of his friends, we were poor, and by the time he got to high school, the neighborhood was mostly large McMansions. Our house was built in the 60s and wasn't the biggest or the smallest when we moved in. It may have been one of the smallest by the time I left for college, though. Story 16. From a lower class background and got into a top university in the UK where I joined the scuba club. I'm an an instructor, paid for all my training and kit myself, but damn, you could see my kit had been well used. Still safe and functional, just faded, frayed around the edges, etc. One of the senior members, he must have been nearly mid-20s, pointed out how beaten up one of the items of the kit looked, and asked why I didn't replace it. I was genuinely confused. It worked, it was safe, all good to use. He kept pointing out how it looked, and I point blank told him I didn't have 500 pounds to drop on something just because what I had didn't look pretty anymore. He then asked why I didn't get my parents to get me a new one. Yeah, because in my 20s, after having worked part or full-time for 7 years, I will totally ask my single parent on disability benefits to buy me new toys. The guy was completely baffled. Story 17. I had a roommate in the early mid-2000s. He was from a wealthy family and flaunted every chance he got. He pointed out that the lease on his BMW was more than I made in a month. He had a big screen, but his plasma was on order, etc. He was so damn insecure was his thing, constantly trying to show off, get people on his side, and to get them to like him at any cost. The cars his dad gave him aren't doing it, his house isn't doing it, he made the basketball team but no one in school likes him, etc. So his power play, after a big win to celebrate, he has the basketball team come over to stay at his house. His sister is 16 at the time and considered one of the best looking girls at the school. He brings her down to the party, gets her insanely drunk, and turns her over to the team, who proceeds to run a train on her. Used everything at his disposal to win over the team and make friends. Even his sister. Yeah, I don't know if this is exactly rich kid syndrome, just like piece of garbage syndrome. Also, I'm no legal expert, but sounds very illegal. I gotta be honest, I think so far, this is our big loser of the thread. Screw you, dude. Story 18. My freshman year of high school, I stopped asking for stuff for Christmas because the year previous, things got particularly nasty between my parents, and I took collateral in the war between them. Dad said all I wanted was money and material things, like my mom, because I wanted to stay home for Christmas since I went to my dad's for Thanksgiving. And I never really wanted anything for Christmas anyway because all the stuff I wanted was too big. Money-wise, not size. When I got back to school and got to my first period geography class and the others were talking about how their break was, the dude next to me was complaining that all I got was a pair of Vans, $450, and an Oregon Ducks hoodie that was stupid because it said Ducks Oregon in descending fashion over the Oregon logo instead of Oregon Ducks. Story 19. I dated an insanely rich guy. His parents were rich at least. Like private island, friends had literal castles, etc. Anyway, his half-brother was a total jerk. His dad is one of the top lawyers in the UK, so naturally he likes to argue in a very condescending way. So one time we got into a debate, his stance being we shouldn't use taxpayer money to educate the general public on safety, and that if those people weren't educated, they should just die, etc., etc. It was getting a bit ridiculous, so I finally asked him straight up, thinking it would be a turning point for him, so, do you think the actual lives of people who are born in less fortunate circumstances than yours are not valuable enough to save? He said yes, without hesitation. This man genuinely believes his life is worth more than others just because he was born into wealth. Story 20. My cousins. My entire family has never been rich. We come from poor Scottish immigrants and Native Americans, so there's never been money in the family. My aunt and uncle have been successful in their lives. They give their kids everything they want. They're paying for their colleges and apartments. They bought both kids new cars. I asked for some help with rent from all 4 kids because I take care of her mother, maternal grandma, and have been for several years. I wanted to be able to save money so I could do things for myself. I got called selfish and spoiled. I was appalled. I was a little spoiled when I was a child, but since my teens, I've known what it's like to be super poor. I've known what it's like to go without food because my younger brother, much younger, needed the food more than I did. I've been without electricity and running water, not knowing what to do because I was still a child myself. She knew what it was like to struggle because she grew up the same way. The way I saw it, past tense because I don't care anymore, was that it's not right for me to deprive myself of a life or income I could have to take care of an elderly person when said person has 4 children. I have worked since I was 15 and have always taken care of others. Anytime I've tried to do something for myself, I get called selfish and am made to feel bad about the choice I want to make. Someone else's needs have always come before mine. Bottom line, her kids have never suffered or struggled. They have everything they want or could ever wish for. Yes, I am a little jealous. Mainly because they're allowed to actually be selfish. I understand it won't stop until I make the decision, but when you've been beaten down your whole life, how do you learn to rise up and say enough is enough? It's an ability that is learned, and I never did. Story 21. In high school, one of the rich and popular kids rented out an entire movie theater to have a birthday bash. Everything was included. drinks, food, fair food. They had a snow cone / cotton candy thing set up inside. The arcade was on free play mode and all the movies were playing. I wasn't invited, wasn't popular enough, but one of my buddies was. He was gobsmacked that some families had enough money to virtually shut down a public movie theater for a day. It apparently was crazy enough that some kids got caught with weed during the party. The upside of not getting invited to the crazy party was that my parents bought me a used game for my SNES anyhow. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time more than made up for not attending that birthday party. When I first read this, I thought OP meant like a single theater showing room. I don't actually know what they're called. Anyway, one screen, bunch of seats, that's it. No, OP means the whole complex. Okay, yeah, fair enough. That's pretty crazy. Story 22. I walked into the local US post office in a wealthy community north of Chicago and saw a kid around 20, super preppy looking, leather loafers with no socks, and he is berating the clerk for not wrapping his shipment for him, making a huge scene about how they're paid to help him and that his taxes pay their salaries. Meanwhile, the queue is growing 10 people deep. After the clerk finishes directing him how to properly seal the parcel, the clerk weighs the box, rings him up, and gives him his total. The kid runs a credit card. The clerk asks to see it. She asks if the card belongs to his mother and whether she is present. She isn't. She explains, "You can't use someone else's credit card without written authorization." He starts rage screaming. Spittle comes out of his mouth. The clerk pushes his parcel aside and calls, "Next!" The kid grabs his stuff and then starts knocking over all the displays of packaging and express mail / priority mail supplies. I'm gonna guess he came back with mommy and insisted on speaking to a manager. Story 23. I was that kid. I grew up super crazy wealthy. My father was an inventor of sorts, so we would travel around the world buying houses here and there. We would do this on our yacht, as well as private planes and helicopters. I would have been about 7 or 8 years old at the time. That all sort of ended with a nasty divorce, and by the age of 10 we were still very wealthy, but nothing compared to what it used to be like. The problem was, as an 8-year-old kid going on to 10, I had no concept of reality. The life of luxury that my parents afforded me just seemed normal. So when I got out of that world and went to a public high school in the States, I would ask other kids what kind of helicopter they had, if they had a yacht, so on. I would look down on them if they had anything less. Boy, those were some hard lessons to learn in life. I didn't realize that people didn't like you if you spouted off all those things that you had or used to have. If anything, people just resented you. But from my perspective, I just didn't understand. No one ever told us this wasn't normal. No one ever told us or gave guidance or even gave us any sort of moral understanding of what is right and wrong or how to treat people. Respect was this obscure, abstract word. In retrospect, the way my father raised us was disgusting. He was all about money and power, and making sure we knew we were so much better than everybody else. In the end, it was bullcrap, and my reality came crashing down hard. It took years to rehabilitate how I treated other people. To set my expectations for myself in a realistic frame was another challenge. Anyway, after about the age of 23, I cut ties with my family, almost completely. I live by myself. I have a great job and I'll be fine. I have no expectations of inheriting anything. God knows I didn't get anything from my parents when I walked out on them. I was only called names. But I feel good knowing that I worked hard for what I have now. I have kids, and I think I've made it a mission in my life to make sure they know that they need to treat people with respect at all times. There's no way I'm gonna let them get screwed up like I was. Story 24. Old roommate had lawyers for parents. She spilled water on my laptop and it broke. It wasn't super fancy, but it was an expensive laptop that my parents helped me buy for school. Anyways, when it wouldn't turn on, she said, "Oh, that sucks, but your parents can just get you a new one." They couldn't. I had no laptop for a semester in college, which was incredibly difficult, since the computer lab wasn't open 24/7, and I had studio classes and crap that were always busy. Anyway, I ended up getting a $1,000 scholarship to buy a computer. That Christmas break, her boyfriend stepped on her MacBook Pro and the screen cracked. Instead of fixing the screen, her parents bought her a brand new MacBook Pro, the bigger one. Oh, and a new car. Edit. Oh, also, she said that her and her sister used to play Cinderella. Oh, I did too. Only it was called chores, and I was actually cleaning. She was 21 when I had to teach her how to sweep and mop properly. They always had maids to do it. Story 25. We weren't a wealthy family, but we were upper middle class in an area with a lot of paycheck-to-paycheck families, so we were doing better than okay. Her senior year of high school, my sister blew up the engine in her car because she didn't know what the red light on the dash that said oil meant and ignored it. So she bought a brand new car. car. My parents helped her with the down payment and co-signed the loan, and she was going to make all the payments herself and build her credit. Within 3 months, a repo crew showed up at my dad's office looking for the car because it was 2 payments overdue. She made 1 payment and just said, "Screw that, I guess." So my dad wrote them a check. I think she made 1 or 2 more payments and then graduated high school. My parents had this brilliant idea for a graduation present. They took over the loan payments for her. A couple months later, my sister is crap-faced drunk, rolls the car into a ditch, and it's totaled. Next thing I know, my sister is raging mad at my parents because they took, quote, her insurance check to pay off the loan. She thought that was rightfully her money and the loan was theirs. When it was clear that she wasn't going to get her way, she settled into a multi-year-long sulk, and at every pretense of an opportunity would launch into her, "I didn't even get a graduation present," prepared speech. Once, and I'm not kidding, like 20 years later, she dug up this old chestnut for some reason, and I went off on her like I was Pink Floyd telling kids they can't have any pudding. I ticked off all the money that our parents had put into that car for her, only for her to crash it while drunk, and her only response was, "Yeah, but I was supposed to get a car." That was when I realized that even as a middle-aged adult, my sister was a terrible person. Story 26. I had a kid who wouldn't shut up about his dad's Maserati while I was cooking food in my buddy's kitchen. We had some Food Network barbecue show we had on that he was watching. He looks at me after a while and says, "Hey, so have you ever had barbecue from that place?" It was someplace in Texas, many states away, and I said no. He then looks at me like I'm crazy, and hopes others around us see and hear him say, "Really, you haven't? You gotta try it, man. I'm surprised, honestly." So I ask, why? Is it really good? And he tells me, "Oh, I don't know. I've never been there." I quietly put my carving knife down and look at him. What the hell are you saying then? I have to go to some place and I'm weird for not going to some place that you've never been to? Had you even heard about this place before the show came on? He was flushed red because he wanted so badly for everyone around us to think he'd been there and that I wasn't well off enough to travel there. So I pressed him with question after question of what the place is like. How was the food? What did you order? Oh, right. You've never freaking been there. He basically got up and walked away. Story 27. An evergreen dropout trustafarian gutter punk asked me for a free cigarette while he's wearing a Fossil watch and a new pair of shoes. I told him, "No way," and he proceeded to berate me for not supporting homeless people. He created a huge thing and riled up the rest of his gutter punks into screaming and yelling about homeless people. Cops arrived and started asking questions. He had an apartment down the street and let it out that his parents pay for it as a justification for the claim of not having any money. His wallet had cash and credit cards. About 60% of the loser gutter punks you see in Olympia are not homeless, and if they are, they do it by forcing themselves to be homeless, while having a number of other options that don't involve being a societal parasite and total piece of crap. Olympia sucks now. The cops won't do crap about them pooling up in the parking lot on Washington Street and State Avenue. Story 28. My best friend worked at a boarding high school for troubled teens. He decided to quit because it was a sketchy business. They all are. One of the parents whose son had just graduated decided their son needed more, so they hired my friend and paid him like $5,000 a month to be a live-in mentor. The 19-year-old kid he watched was the worst. Super spoiled, entitled, just awful. Used to his parents just throwing money at his problems. He cried, literally, about having to work at Burger King because a, quote, freaking R-word worked there, someone who was mentally disabled, and he was embarrassed. That guy still working there and this kid got fired. Despite being 19 and from the other side of the country and living right off a college campus, he'd only date high school girls, and he would lie to all of his friends saying that my friend was his bodyguard. Oh yeah, this kid needs a reality check. From the sounds of it, the parents are probably disappointed. They're like, man, we really screwed this one up. This kid is a jerk. Story 29. The following passage was posted to UW-Madison memes for milk-chugging teens, the official meme page of the University of Wisconsin-Madison a few months ago. We're all still debating whether or not this is satire given the account's other posts on our page. Quote, "Sorry, but I've just got to vent for a minute. So I graduated from a prestigious university with a BBA almost 3 years ago. My dad owned 2 Mercedes-Benz dealerships, and he passed down the one with a lower sales volume to me when I graduated. I'm 25 now, and I always figured by this age I would be making at least $250,000 annually. Unfortunately, I only made just shy of $190,000 last year. I've set commission caps for our sales representatives, and technicians are being paid as low as tangibly possible, so there's really no further cost cutting I can do to divert funds to my salary. I hate that I'm giving up 32 hours of my life per week for a middling salary. I can't even afford to drive the cars I sell. When I first started the job back in 2015, I bought a 2012 Mercedes C350, but it kept breaking down on me, and thus wasn't viable as a daily driver. At this point, I had to replace it with a pre-owned 2016 Lincoln Navigator, in addition to my 2009 Pontiac G8, which I have as a soft-core performance vehicle. It's humiliating. I feel pathetic. Here I am, living off the scraps of my customers, pulling up in an American luxury car to my own Mercedes-Benz dealership. I just feel pathetic. As a Mercedes-Benz dealer, I should be driving a G-Class no problem. To make matters worse, a friend of mine from college is making more than me. He majored in finance and is making over $220,000 annually as a corporate investment banker. He was always intelligent, so I expected he'd do well, but not as well as me. He just didn't carry himself well, you know? Yet here I am being outpaced by this slouchy POS. I'm just so incredibly frustrated, like literally pulling my hair out every time I think about it. Story 30. One friend of mine dated someone of super wealth. The guy never bragged about it, and for the first few dates, she just assumed he dressed well. Then he invited her back to his place, where he said he lived alone. His place was a very nice townhome on the wealthy side of town. When she followed him in, a butler removed her coat and asked her to remove her shoes, which she hadn't prepared for since her leggings had a hole in them. The interior was very plush and decked out with gold fixtures and antiques, but without being too ostentatious. "Would you like a snack?" he asked. They went to the dining room where another maid set up trays and some fresh pastries. Then her and the butler stood along the wall and just waited there. "I thought you said you lived alone." "I do." "What about them?" "Who?" "Those two." "What, you mean the help?" He didn't even consider them people. They were background appliances to him. She still ended up spending the night and they banged. When she woke the following morning, she saw her clothes had been cleaned, folded, and pressed, including her underwear, and her leggings were replaced with a new pair of a nicer brand. "Your butler came in while we were sleeping?" "I guess. Why?" "I was naked." "Okay, so was I?" He seemed confused as to why this was a problem. When she left, she noticed her shoes and jacket had been cleaned and repaired. Of course, everyone asks why she didn't marry him. She says he just gave off this creepy, disconnected vibe. Story 31. My generationally rich gay insurance lawyer friend said to me, a well-off working-class programmer trans woman, that discrimination and prejudice in the workplace and hiring and renting practices don't exist, and there should be no laws against it, because the freedom to discriminate is more important than the freedom from discrimination/to work and live, if indeed that discrimination exists at all. He also insisted that if it were an issue, then you should just go move and work somewhere else, building your own companies and communities. If it's not totally obvious why this is freaking stupid, let's look at the history of violent dismantling of black communities and poverty pipelines, and how you can't really build good things when you have zero freaking money. I mean, runaway queer kids make their own spaces all the time. They're DIY homeless spaces that generally I sure as crap wouldn't want to live in. Like, does a homeless shantytown count? That's the solution we're talking about. Story 32. Man, I have several. I went to college where there were a decent amount of rich kids. One day in the dining room, a girl was hysterically crying, and her friends were trying to calm her down. The reason? Well, the recession hit, and her dad had to sell one of their yachts. An ex of mine was a consultant for a private helicopter company that occasionally had government contracts. The owner's daughter was the one running the place, through nepotism, of course. Throughout my ex's time there, she had freaked out about her coffee a la Miranda Priestly, almost ruined possible contract deals by not having done her research, / having the presentation ready. She hands it off for employees below her to do a week to 24 hours before the meeting, and buying a specific brand of helicopters against the advice of my ex. She wasted a pretty penny and only got a scolding from her father. Another ex was considering ditching his car and just using Uber to work instead. Round trip, it would have cost him around $80 every day, not including tip. He was considering it because he kept getting into accidents, and his parents were getting mad about the insurance premium. Someone I saw briefly didn't speak to his mom for about 2 months because she wouldn't let him use her credit card. This kid is about 25, but his family hasn't given him his trust fund yet, and with good reason. Same guy also refused to use public transport, I'm guessing because he thought it was dirty. Story 33. I went to one of the poorest schools in my state my senior year, and ended up accidentally taking a freshman Intro to Engineering course. It was listed as robotics, and I just decided to stick with it. It was a fun class. There was a kid I sat next to who came from a really wealthy family. He was chauffeured to school daily, always had someone bring him ridiculous meals for lunch, etc. Let's call him Nick. Nick is nice enough. Pretty smart too. A bit pompous, but that was expected. About halfway through the year, he got his license, and was pretty hyped. But the day after, he was livid. I asked him why. He very casually explained it was because his parents bought him an older model sports car. He'd wanted whatever the newest BMW at the time was, but they got him last year's model. I just sort of shrug, think nothing of it. Then he's gone for a day, comes back to school, and has a brand new car, the model he wanted. He told me in class that he complained enough to his parents they just bought him the new one, and they let him keep the older one as a casual ride. I didn't even try to explain to him how crazy it is. Yeah, when someone's that privileged and rich, there really is no point in explaining it to them. They're in their own world and you just kind of have to live with it. 2 BMWs though? Damn, you're gonna be going to the shop a lot, brother. Story 34. Honestly, mine is kind of the opposite of everyone here. So I'm in an a cappella group at school. We have this one guy in our group who is as nice as can be. Super cool guy, very committed to the group, hard worker, everything. Last year, right around when he first got in, we found out we were doing a gig in his town in New Jersey, so he invited us to his house for dinner. Of course, homemade food is always good, so we were down. After the gig, we're driving to the address he gave us, thinking, this can't be right. All around us are these enormous mansions and whatnot. Finally, we get to his, one of the biggest in the neighborhood. 14 average guys pull up to this astounding mansion. He welcomes us in like it's nothing. He and his whole family were so humble and nice, we had no clue. Would have never expected him to be that rich. Anyway, it was an eye-opener for all of us. He could easily have been a jerk at school, flaunting his money everywhere, but he never talks about it, and is just like the rest of us. Still a great guy. Story 35. I went to a fairly average college. Middle class and underprivileged kids would go there to get a decent education. This one guy, we will call him Sam, whose family was super rich, bought him an Audi R8 for his 21st birthday. Needless to say, very cool car. He was in my macroeconomics class, and let's just say the kid wasn't the brightest star in the sky. One day, Sam got into an argument with the teacher regarding how Sam was talking during the lecture, and he didn't answer a question when the teacher asked. Sam then told the teacher he doesn't need to be in this stupid, quote, broke college, saying his dad makes 10 times more than the teacher makes. Sam also told the teacher the car was probably worth more than the teacher's house. He threw his books across the room and told the teacher to go screw himself. Unknowingly, the teacher got into trouble with the Board of Academics, because Sam's dad had made a pretty big donation to the school at the beginning of the year. Now, this is the good part. The teacher continued to teach, and Sam was still in the class, but all the other students hated him for what he did and knew he was a spoiled little brat. One day during class, some of the students trashed the hell out of his car. They spray painted his black Audi R8 with words like idiot, donghead, jackass, and had demolished every single part of his car with spray paint. And sadly, they put battery acid on the roof of the car. Sam finds out about what happened to his car and went on a rampage in the school cafe. We never saw him again after that. He left the school permanently. 5 years passed by and I graduated college and started working at a wireless telecommunications store. One day while I'm at work, I see Sam passing by wearing Crocs, shorts, and a t-shirt. I called him over and initiated small talk. Turns out Sam got charged with assault, and his parents stopped giving him money and kicked him out. He's now an employee at the local Denny's, a diner in Canada, working a 9 to 5 and taking the bus every day. He still talks to his mom and dad, but I think they're making him learn the value of money and how to be a humble person. Story 36. So this isn't a bad rich kid syndrome, I think, but here it goes. When I was a teacher, my parents wanted me and my sisters to learn English. So we went to a nice institute after school, and it was full of rich kids. My parents weren't super poor, but this was a really expensive institute. It was a huge sacrifice, and after a few years, we couldn't afford it anymore. I don't remember exactly what we were learning that day, but we started talking about food using the new concepts. They were talking about fancy restaurants, what their in-house personal master chef could do, and other things. Then one of the girls started talking about when one day she was alone with her nanny and housekeeper, no master chef this day, and she made her white rice with sliced sausages. That was her favorite meal. It was the first time she ate it, and she was speaking like it was the best thing she ever tasted. I tried not to laugh. Then I saw my teacher and she was trying too, so we both laughed. I was like, what the hell? I eat that crap every day. The other students couldn't understand why we were laughing, and that was even funnier. They were all like 15 to 18, and I just couldn't believe it. She always talked nice about her nanny. She was always there when her parents weren't. so you could tell she really loved her and loved the meal because of it, but that was funny. Story 37. This one took me by surprise, because the girl was very quiet about her family, and I only experienced this because it was just me and her in the apartment. We were both in school and she was from another state, so I had no idea about her family at that time. I was dating this girl, and one morning we woke up and realized she overslept and missed her flight for her friend's wedding. I'm thinking, no worries, we'll call and get on another flight. She has a slightly different idea. She calls her dad, asking him to send their plane to get her so she doesn't miss the wedding. I was like, whoa, are you serious? She was. Her dad didn't send the plane, and he told her to figure it out on her own. He's very generous to his kids and others, but this was clearly not a situation that called for the plane. She's also not the type of person who would expect her dad to do this. She was just panicked and flustered at the time. Oh, and happy ending to the story for those interested. I married her a few years later. Story 38. Lived briefly with a very awful rich girl. Her parents bought her a beautiful condo, 1.5 mil in a rich Jewish neighborhood. She had a trust fund that paid out thousands monthly for her to literally do nothing. She went to a fancy law school, passed the bar, did one internship and quit because she didn't like it. And by it, I mean working in general. She had severe rich people substance use issues, flew to New York City to bang a doctor for some Klonopin, OD'd before that, drank every single day and slept all day. Did nothing, didn't even leave the house. Still spent $150 bi-weekly for a house cleaner because she was too lazy to even clean despite doing nothing all day. One time she gave me an outfit for an event because she never wore the clothes and they didn't fit her anymore. Some things still had tags. I was wearing over $5,000 worth of clothes. I looked them all up. I was the opposite. Grew up dirt poor on welfare with the 9 siblings. We all bounced around, some in foster care, etc. Both parents are addicts. Worked 80 hours weekly to put myself through school, build a life, etc. The things this female dog would complain about, views she had on certain topics, so outside of reality. Like she was completely clueless to her privileges. I had to tell her about my work as a social worker and she'd be like, "Why don't your homeless clients just buy homes?" Or, "That stuff happens here?" Basically, she threw money at everything and complained all day about things within her power to change but never did. She never realized that the only reason she's not homeless herself is because of money she didn't earn. She acted like she was above me, the people I worked with, my friends, etc. In reality, she was a pathetic loser. I'm grateful for what I have every day, and you couldn't pay me enough to live like her or be like her. Story 39. Was working at a gas station, one of the full-service ones where we fill you up, check your oil, etc. for you. This guy rolls up in a brand new Denali truck with a speedboat on a trailer. This speedboat was easily over 100,000, like, it was nice. I don't care for sailing or boating, but this thing was nice, and if offered by anyone, I would totally take a spin in it. Well, I'm filling up the truck, admiring the boat, and his 2 spoiled children, both probably no older than 13 but no younger than 8, are ripping their father a new one because he didn't get the one with a built-in TV. They viewed the boat as a piece of garbage because they couldn't bring and plug their Xbox into it. For a guy who grew up relatively poor for my area, not absolute poverty levels, but I was one of the poor kids of the town, and is still struggling financially as an adult, hearing those kids complain triggered me to no end. Finished filling the truck and let them be on their way. Got a $20 tip out of it, but still, to see such spoiled kids talk like that, especially in my small rural town, was almost alarming. Story 40. I actually have a relevant story for this. I got sent to a private high school in the suburbs for my last 2 years of high school. Wasn't doing well academically in the big public one I used to attend. So I encountered a bunch of rich kids, most nice, a couple terrible, and one stood out above the rest due to the sheer volume of money at her disposal. More than I ever thought even realistically possible. She was a Chinese foreign exchange student. Parents were big business moguls in China, probably in bed with the government, I'd imagine, and they had a net worth far north of 100 million to my knowledge. They bought a condo in the city I live that they kept operational all year round because every once in a while they had business meetings in the area and didn't like hotels. In any case, they were loaded. Now, this girl, she was really nice. Truly a sweet and kind person, not like the rich jerk archetype. But my god, did she not understand what money is at all. She at one point was surprised when I told her that credit cards used actual money because her parents just paid for it. She also had a fairly nice new Mazda that her parents got for her, but just one problem: no driver's license. So being the economic genius she was, she lent that 2017 Mazda indefinitely to this one guy for the price of a single Chipotle burrito per week. She wasn't mean about money or condescending, she just didn't understand it, and couldn't fathom why people were hesitant to blow $150 on concert tickets to go to a rave with her on like a Thursday night. She now goes to an art school in New York, and her parents bought her a cushy condo in Manhattan. Also, she didn't have to worry about a commute or renting a place in a less desirable area. I have other rich kid stories from that school, like the kid who got caught drag racing his Audi R8 by some neighborhood watch people and they reported him to the school, or the other girl whose dad had been disbarred from being a lawyer twice, once for scamming the family of a dead guy by continuing to collect legal fees from the deceased, or the other kid whose dad was wrapped up in the Wells Fargo scam thing and was facing massive quantities of legal fees and was complaining about government regulation, or the other kid who became a self-made millionaire at 19 because he taught himself to code to make Minecraft mods and went on to work at a tech startup, which is still by far the most impressive thing I've ever witnessed. Oh, and can't forget the other kid who had 2 mansions on his property, and one was used exclusively as a party house, or a girl who bummed around Europe for an entire summer off her parents' credit card. Rich people are something else, man. I don't know why the guy who made Minecraft mods had to be roped into this. That's not rich kid syndrome. He made that money himself. And now he still works. It's not like he made $1 billion and is resting on his laurels and being annoying. I don't think he belongs in this. Story 41. In college, I was working on a group project with an international student from China. I was vaguely aware that she was super rich. The Chinese students were almost always pretty rich as their parents had paid to move them to the USA, buy them nice cars and apartments, and pay for an already very expensive private college. But it never occurred to me just how different our concepts of money were until she, flipping through her phone at the end of a meeting, said, "Hey, OP, I was thinking of buying something to celebrate finishing this project. Does this purse look better in blue or white?" The purse in question was a basic small crossbody purse that looked like the kind you could get cheaply at Forever 21. I swiped down on her phone to see the other color, and I swear to God, my eyes nearly popped out of my head. That purse cost $4,500 USD. That was more money than I had made in an entire summer internship the year before. Her purse would have been worth more than my car. I tried to play it cool so as to not embarrass her in front of the rest of our group, but I think ultimately I just said, "Well, if you're planning to treat yourself to that extent, you should make sure it matches your favorite clothes." She didn't seem to see any issues with this. To her, this was the equivalent of buying a $20 purse at Forever 21, I guess. Story 42. Went to a college full of rich international students, rich city brats and the like. They all used to brag about how they had BMWs. They had to prove they had around 3 million Canadian to even come over here. Most of the Canadian kids I had class with had parents who were also accountants, forcing them to take the same program, wearing Gucci everything. One day in our GNED class, we were learning about white privilege, and I was the main target considering I was the only white girl in that class. Now, I could get the white privilege bullcrap if I wasn't in a class full of overprivileged rich kids who used their race as a way to float on the backs of people who actually struggle. Basically, they were all looking at me when the prof was talking, and one girl straight up stared at me and said, "Must be nice to be white." What the hell? So I replied, yeah, being raised broke as hell, accumulating mass amounts of student loans, not having a BMW, living in the ghetto, oh, that's nice. Want to trade lives, you ignorant female dog? I guess I could have been nicer about it, because I'm sure they have their own struggles, but it bothered me that I was being labeled as privileged because of my skin color, when clearly these kids had it way better than I ever will. Story 43. The Affluenza Teen. Ethan Anthony Couch, born April 11th, 1997, ended the lives of 4 people while driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs on June 15th, 2013, in Burleson, Texas. He was intoxicated, driving on a restricted license, and speeding in a residential area when he lost control and collided with a group of people assisting another driver with a disabled SUV. 4 people lost their lives in the collision, and a total of 9 people were injured. 2 passengers in Couch's truck suffered serious bodily injury, one with complete paralysis. 3 hours after the incident, Couch had a blood alcohol content of 0.24%, 3 times the legal limit for adult drivers in Texas. He also tested positive for marijuana and Valium. D. Dick Miller, a psychologist hired as an expert by the defense, testified in court that the teen was a product of affluenza and was unable to link his actions with consequences because of his parents teaching him that wealth buys privilege. It was initially reported that as part of his sentencing, their son would be sent for teen substance abuse and mental health rehabilitation, going to a place called Newport Academy, an upscale residential treatment center in Newport Beach, California, which costs upwards of $450,000 annually. The facility offers a 90-day treatment program that includes horseback riding, mixed martial arts, massage and cookery, interpretive dance therapy, a swimming pool, basketball, and 6 acres of land. Story 44. Friend's family was low-key super rich, like top 1% rich. He was super humble, but their parents bought him and his sister a house in our nearby college town and paid for their expenses, food, clothes, outings, and they lived together, so I would see her often. I was 21 and had been on my own since I was 17, so I was living off very low income. His sister could never understand why I would hold back on buying drinks or food sometimes, and would openly ask me why I only owned 3 or 4 shirts. One time when I mentioned having my own bank account, she was absolutely awestruck at the idea. The one big time I remember thinking, wow, that's some rich kid syndrome, was when she showed up at the house with $500 worth of groceries. It didn't look like what $500 in food and drinks should look like. I remember going to Aldi and getting a full cart for $50. She had maybe a cart and a half worth of items. She bought the top brand expensive items from Whole Foods and didn't know why everyone was just jaw-dropped at the amount. Still blows my mind. Story 45. Kid in my college dorm. Apparently, he was orphaned as a little kid and was left a sizable inheritance. He claimed to have a really nice sports car at home, but he didn't have his license, so he didn't drive. He relied on rides from other people whenever he wanted to go somewhere. Thing is, he was super loud and obnoxious. No one liked being around him. He offered me $50 once for a ride to the local Walmart. I needed the cash, so I took him. He bought a new TV, new clothes, an Xbox, some video games, and just other random stuff. Apparently, he didn't want any of it. He was just bored and wanted something to do. And another even better one. There was another girl in our building who asked quite seriously when laundry collection came around. She was rather taken aback when they broke the news to her. I found out about a month later that once she ran out of clean clothes, she started going out and buying new outfits. Story 46. I was made to feel like one of those rich kids once, and I'll never forget it because it really hurt me. It sunk some more of my self-confidence and made me embarrassed of who I was. And hey, I wasn't even rich. 1990s. I was 14 and I had my first real boyfriend. I thought we were in love. Our lifestyles were different, but I didn't realize that meant anything and how much that bothered him until one night he blew up at me. See, my parents were middle class, homeowners, both present, small business owners, 2 7-Elevens that they sold to buy a small-town grocery store. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with his dad who was not self-employed and also worked very hard, often long hours. We were half asleep over the phone middle of the night watching a stand-up comedy act on Comedy Central together, and the comedian made a joke about, why do 7-Elevens have locks on the doors if they're open 24 hours? I got a little more rattled than maybe I should have, because I knew the locks were used after holdups while waiting for the police to arrive, which sometimes could take hours, and I fully understood the implications and terror that goes along with this, so I felt the joke was insensitive. He blew up. Not everyone knows that, okay? Not everyone grew up in your Norman Rockwell world or owned 7-Elevens. I was so embarrassed and hurt that I just apologized and we hung up. Not long after, he ghosted me. You know, this kind of feels like a breakup that could only happen when you're 14. Like, there's just such a clear sign of not knowing how to communicate to people, huh? Because what happened here makes not no sense, but like very little. Like, how does this ever lead to a breakup? Clearly, he had been wanting to say something about that for a while. I will say, obviously, pretty unnecessary for OP to, actually the joke about 7-Elevens. Like, I have a feeling the comedian knows that the locks still have a purpose anyway. Just a weird situation. Story 47. True story. I was, friends with a member of Saudi royalty. Not sure what/how he is royalty, but I am sure he was never bullcrapping. I say friends in quotes because although we enjoyed each other's company and kept in touch for a while, I don't view him nor many people as a true friend. For a true friend is one you know will always always have your back, whether it's in a fight or giving you advice you don't want to hear to better your life, etc. But he wasn't your typical rich kid. In the sense, he wasn't a complete freaking butt. He was actually quite nice and enjoyed just being goofy and laughing. Nothing was too serious for him, even if it was a serious situation. We had a lot of fun, and although I would attempt to pay for some things, he would flat out refuse. But yeah, he was filthy rich, to the point of when he left my country, he had no intentions of taking his $120,000 souped-up Dodge Charter. He asked me if I wanted it. Not really knowing him too well or his background, I politely declined, saying I already had a car and there would be nowhere to store it. Yeah, most of you are going to be like, he's such an idiot, and yeah, I am. Also, I didn't know if there were any liens or anything on his car, although I doubt it. But rather to inquire and potentially get an awesome vehicle for free, I declined not only because I didn't know the car's situation, but it would be way too big of a gift to accept. I am just not the type of person to accept free things. I like to work for what I receive. If you were to offer me $1,000 on the street for walking by you, I would refuse it. I know it can be viewed as bizarre. He ended up leaving his car to his roommate who sold it for drugs. He also gave the roommate all the furniture in the apartment, brand new awesome furniture, and paid the apartment's rent for an entire year before leaving. Mo, if you're reading this, I hope you're doing well and still DJing to this day. Some of those songs you showed me still resonate with me today, and I truly enjoyed the nights you would spend entertaining me and others at your apartment. I enjoyed your drinks, your DJing skills, and most importantly, your presence. OP, how are you going to throw that last line in there like you're borderline in love with this guy from afar, but still say, oh, not a true friend, as a true friend will always have a... Come on, man. Just say you were friends. It's not that deep. Story 48. Every now and then on a sports team subreddit or their Facebook updates, you'll get one or at least a few misinterpretations of what a true fan is. I've got season tickets in the best section and fly to every away game, which is fine, but I've seen it said only to try to negate the fandom of someone in the rafters. One time I commented on an out-of-town fan's post about what seats to get. I said the balcony seats are actually really good and the true fans sit up there. And it was met with one very angry wealthy dude who scoffed at me, saying, "Oh, you don't have to be poor to be a big fan." On the second example, I'll admit I stepped into muddy waters with the true fan remark, but to call anyone who spends between $60 to $120 per seat for a 3-hour event poor is kinda ridiculous. Story 49. Oh boy, I live in a really wealthy suburb of Nashville. My dad caught a lucky break with work and we're able to live a great fulfilling life, but I know what it's like to have money problems. These kids don't. I go to a public school, not even one of the 50,000 a year privates here. My first story was in the 8th grade when a girl, the daughter of a famous sports coach, told our teacher, "I need the homework for the next 2 weeks. We're going to one of our houses in Italy." Freshman year, I got to see the cars. There were 8 G-Wagons, 2 Aston Martins, and I didn't bother to count the QX80s and Porsches and sick trucks. This girl, whose dad is a prominent country singer, got a black lifted G-Wagon for her birthday and complained because she wanted a Tesla. At tennis, a kid got hit by my serve and her mom threatened to sue me for assault. We actually did get sued because in a storm, the fence the neighbors owned fell and landed in their koi pond, and they thought our garden, quote, compromised the integrity of the fencing. My neighbor, a retired stock analyst, was recently arrested for securities fraud. By far the craziest came from a girl from Hong Kong, though. She's really into the streetwear scene and gives her friends hundreds of dollars of clothes and gifts. She has a major weed addiction and listens to a ton of rap and thinks it's cool. Her plug goes to another school, so she drove to downtown Nashville and purchased half a block of weed and brought it to school. She left it in her class and was showing it off in the morning. That same day, we had a dog team come in and sniff the school on an anonymous tip. She tried to run, the dog tackled her, she broke her leg. Dad threatened to sue the school for, quote, creating an environment where dangerous thoughts were bred. FFS people, control your kids before a police dog does it for you. Story 50. Ooh boys, this is a long one. More of an entitled kid than rich kid syndrome, but they're basically the same. I work at a ranch. Basically all the riders there suffered from rich kid syndrome, but I was the lowly stable hand who had to work for his lessons. So I'm a total beginner at 15. Never rode a horse in my life. I get put on the most beginner-friendly horse possible. A lovely Rocky Mountain mare by the name of Godiva. Smooth gait, well-tempered, ready and willing to deal with me being an idiot, not to mention beautiful. So I work my butt off in the hopes that I actually get to ride that afternoon. I got there at 8 in the morning, lessons began at 3. I do everything I can. Pressure wash the barn walkways, dust, sweep, do some extra grooming, clean and reorganize some tack, and a crap ton of crap shoveling, plus feeding and grooming their other pets. 2 pigs, a bunny, and a bunch of dogs. I'm not saying I hate my job, but it was a lot. 3 o'clock comes around and I'm bouncing in my seat ready to go. One of my very first riding lessons. I'd even get to trot around with some of the pros and to learn from them. My trainer/boss comes out. The other students start arriving. Of course, they're all in their expensive riding gear, custom tack, etc. I'm in dirty jeans and a now permanently stained t-shirt. Definitely don't fit in with the crowd. I spend some time helping get the horses out, grooming, tacking up, and meeting the parents. All the parents were shockingly nice. Asked questions about my riding experience, school, why I started volunteering, and then this one chick. A student, maybe like 12, better than me at riding, short and tiny. I'm tacking up Godiva, baby talking her, telling her how good she is, how happy I am to ride her, and then this little girl comes up with her helmet under her arm and says, "You're not riding her." I'm a nice guy, not in a weird incel way, so I just kind of chuckle and explain she's the most beginner-friendly horse for me. I ask if she wants to ride Reese, a Friesian, one of the most expensive breeds out there, plus my favorite horse. She turns me down before I even finish. She's determined on riding the only horse I have the capacity to ride, starts pitching a fit. She's starting to frighten the horse, so I back off. I'm losing my hearing, so I have to get really close to people to talk to them. So I find my trainer and discuss it with her rather than shouting. She says, "Yeah, I'm riding Godiva." I explain what this whiny little bowl of soggy cornflakes said, told her she's frightening the horse, and my trainer nods and disappears. Still not trying to cause a ruckus, I leave the horse with Richie Rich, female dog edition, and disappear to give my favorite horses some hugs so I can keep myself calm. Bit later, trainer gets me back, has me take Godiva into the arena and hop on. The lesson goes fine, but I don't see the little girl around. Then, when I come back, this girl, now half as dirty as I am, has to put all the tack away, give the horse a bath, she was sweating from the ride, etc. Turns out she's been really whiny before, and she got warned she would have to muck out the stalls and such if she did it again. But hey, at least Godiva didn't have to deal with her. I gotta say, props to the trainer for following through with that, not giving anyone special treatment. You act like a little baby, you gotta do some work. And I can only hope the girl learned a lesson about entitlement from that too. Story 51. Went on a date with this one guy. Tinder profile shows up, really smart, and was an entrepreneur. The profile pic was of him with his dog in a nice park. Later found out it was his backyard. So hey, there were check marks next to the top 2 qualities I love in a man: smart and dog lover. Sweet. Now, I live on my own at the time, pay my bills, have a side business and work full-time, have a car, money to do extracurricular activities on the weekends and all that jazz. So it could be concluded that I, as a 25-year-old, would be successful. I swipe right, and 15 minutes later, I'm engrossed in a sapiosexual relationship with this guy, and it's going great. Funny conversations with intellectual banter, the works. So later during the evening, we decide on a date. I tell him I'll pick him up and woo him in person with my effervescent personality. A sidebar, I'm a guy. Date day. I roll up in my 2016 Chevy Cruise LT to this massive driveway I've only seen in Napa Valley at a winery. Well, screw me, I think to myself, and giggle because no pun was intended at all. He comes out, I get the passenger door for him, and we're off to dinner, then a stroll in the Arboretum. Date went fantastically. Two-way, in-depth, involved, and focused conversation the entire time. Lots of laughs happened, and hand-holding, and some kissing. Fast forward 2 days, and no call, no text during the second phase of courting. Waiting dating. So I take it upon myself to break the silence, and follow up with an inquiry of a second date. The response blew my mind considering how the date went. "I'm sorry, but you drive a Chevy Cruise. That's like a Honda, but worse. Everything else about you is perfect, except that you lied about being wealthy. I was under the impression you had lots of money because you own a side business and work full-time and live on your own. Everything else about you is perfect, but I'm going to pass." Not once did finances come up in any conversation, and my job titles were in my profile. Story 52. I have nothing like anyone else's stories, but I went to a private, well-known university with a lot of rich kids. Some just disappeared during midterms or took mental health days. This really rich South Korean kid only showed up once a month in my 4 times a week morning Japanese class and still passed. I'm sure his parents were donors or something. In one class, this girl who sat in front of me always let her jacket fall to the floor. Being the unfortunately non-rich person that I am who was raised right, I told her jacket was on the ground. She just nodded and ignored it, so I picked it up and placed it on her chair during the break. It was a brand new Burberry jacket. Another day in another class eavesdropped on a group of girls deciding where to go for spring break. I referred to these types of conversations in my head as country hopping, since they would literally tour an entire region in a week and act like it was no big deal. And here I was applying for credit cards and trying to use leftover financial aid money to afford my used textbooks in the school store. One last story. My mom really enjoyed watching that Rich Kids show at the time, and told me to look for E.J. Johnson since he would be on campus. I did see him one day waiting for the tram decked out in designer clothing with a Louis V bag and designer shades stepping onto the transportation. He looked like a model walking the runway. I thought about taking a picture as I sipped my $1 McDonald's coffee, but didn't want to seem like too much of a peasant, so I decided to keep walking. Story 53. In order to graduate from my high school, all seniors had to give a 30-minute speech in their English classes on some aspect of their lives that shaped them, as well as how it connects to the assigned readings that year, along with playing a video or song or bringing in pictures or whatever. Mind you, the district my school was in was massive, and in one of the only suburban areas in my state, thus meaning there would be kids on food stamps and welfare sitting next to kids whose parents were both doctors. This socio-economic climate naturally caused tension between kids throughout the years, so part of this project was to show that no matter what, we can all experience the ups and downs of life. It was really eye-opening and brought a sense of camaraderie before graduation. Anyway, the year I graduated, there were a lot of good speeches in my English class. Kids talking about finding out they were adopted, loss of a parent, mental health issues, you have it. Then this kid in my class who was a well-known craphead, super rich, both parents were lawyers, waltzes up and says, "Well, I wrote this at like 10 last night, so..." And then continued on to say, "But I've never had anything bad happen to me. It just doesn't happen. The closest was when I went to a party and made some questionable decisions and drove my car off the road, but I was fine. Yeah, my parents were kind of mad, but it all worked out in my favor because they bought me a Benz." Then he played a clip from Dragon Ball Z and sat back down. Story 54. I'm not certain if this is considered the craziest, but I went to an elite boarding school, which I will not name. And as with most, if not all, schools, there was a no alcohol or drug policy. Of course, being mostly children of the 1%, it wasn't unusual for certain people to receive preferred treatment, and depending on how much money your parents had donated to the school, aside from the tuition, you could get away with a little misbehavior a lot. I personally engaged in shenanigans, but was never caught. I had friends kicked out, usually because their parents didn't donate a lot of money, but the one that really frosted my butt was one student who was sort of a friend, though only by circumstance. For the most part, any student caught drunk or high would be at the very least sent before the disciplinary committee, or at worst, kicked out. This guy would get caught stumbling drunk practically every weekend. And not only would he not get in any trouble, but any staff that found him this way would simply usher him to his room and tell him to stay there for the night, and that was it. He was never even yelled at for his behavior. Of course, I'm sure it helped that his father donated the sports complex, which was about $10 million, back in 1990, and guys like that never seemed to get in any trouble. I'm sure he must be a well-adjusted and kind-hearted individual now with an appreciation for accountability. In a school that was populated by princes, princesses, and children of the 1%, it was a real eye-opener for a kid whose parents may have been affluent, but raised us to be very different people. Never gave us money, made us work from the age of 16, etc. Story 55. I'm managing a bar that's located near an expensive private university in our town. At closing time, we're ushering everyone out when this one rich kid asks for another drink. We tell him last call was 30 minutes ago and now it's time to leave, at which point he starts quoting dollar amounts to me to see how much I would take to give him another drink. I tell him that no amount is worth losing our liquor license and my job, but he keeps going. "What if I gave you $100? 1,000? I know you have a price, I just want to know how much I can buy you for." It was the last line that really upset me. He wasn't just being an entitled jerk. I could tell by the look on his face he was genuinely curious to find out how much it would take to pay a lowly commoner like myself to break the law. We shoved him out the door onto the street and locked up, at which point he just stood there looking in the window waving money at me. What a jerk. Story 56. I went to a public high school in a middle/upper middle class suburb. Not so much syndrome, but a rich kid at the poor high school in town. This one kid, his family was filthy rich. His parents bought the resource officers, cop stationed at the school parking spot, because his car kept getting dinged by doors. It was always interesting to see what he would show up in. Cars he drove while in high school were an H2 Hummer, white, an Acura NSX, yellow, a Dodge Viper, blue, a Chevy ZR1 Corvette, weird limey green color, and a Lamborghini Gallardo or Diablo, black. This was in 2002. The other two were twins that had rich kid syndrome. From my understanding, they flipped the car their parents bought them, a brand new Chevy Cavalier, fully loaded top-end model, and convinced their parents to use the insurance money so they could both get breast implants. A few months later, during their graduation party, their parents gifted them a brand new car. Another kid ditched his car in the middle of nowhere and reported it stolen. His parents bought him a new Acura later that week. Story 57. After reading a lot of these stories, my experience seems a lot less extreme, but I'll still tell it. I dated a girl who was substantially better off than me. Family money for us was really tight growing up. Her family wasn't 1% or anything, but very upper middle class. Vacation homes, fancy private school, etc. At first I was like, why would I care how much money her family has? We love each other. But over time, it became so clear how out of touch her and her family really were. Her dad would park in loading zones because he would rather pay the parking ticket than find a spot. Her family also made offhand comments about how much of a disadvantage public school kids were at right in front of me, even though I went to public school, and mind you, I went to an excellent one. It culminated in her having an argument with her father that led to 6 months of her not speaking to him. He would come into her room and ask a question, and I was forced to speak for the both of us because she refused. I finally told her off because she was complaining that he was late paying her sorority dues. I was like, aren't you still not talking to him? And you expect him to pay tons of money? She just told me to, quote, not make this about myself, whatever the hell that means. She was a good person, just so out of touch that she would do some pretty crappy things. Story 58. I went to an international boarding school in the UK and in my second year met Kenneth. The impression I got was that his family was high up the chain in some big Chinese multinational corporation and earning millions. Not sure I ever quite got the full picture on that one. It transpired that his parents had given him an allowance of £5,000 for the next 3 months. He was honestly concerned it might not be enough. First time I'd ever seen my housemaster look speechless. My other roommate was Luke. I'd roomed with him the year before. We always hated one another. I rapidly discovered that Kenneth was also a total jerk. Those first couple years were not exactly pleasant. But here's the thing. Luke was a total pushover for Kenneth, did basically whatever he told him to. I have a vivid memory of Kenneth literally making it rain while Luke did a crappy little dance for him. I reconciled with Luke immediately after we stopped living together. Turns out we're just not compatible roomies. Screw Kenneth though. That guy was a Dong Waffle. Rich as hell, but a total freaking Dong Waffle. Still hate his guts 17 years later. Story 59. Friend of a friend in college was the daughter of a VP at a big fast food chain. They weren't crazy rich, but very, very well off. She took 6 years to graduate with an art degree. Because she did multiple study trips abroad, unrelated to her degree, she spent the entire summer traveling as well. She told me once that she didn't understand why I, or anyone else, didn't study abroad and travel while young. She didn't understand that I couldn't afford it, or why I had to take out loans when I had a scholarship. Daddy doesn't pay my rent. After she graduated, she moved to New York City and lived in a nice building on the Upper West Side. Doorman, elevator, in-unit laundry, all those things that are luxuries in New York City, all paid for by her parents. She was a volunteer at the Guggenheim. Didn't even try to get a job because that would interfere with traveling. She'd go on trips for months at a time, leaving her expensive apartment vacant while her dad paid. It sat empty unless she had friends in New York, when she would let them stay there for free. She is currently living in Singapore on a student visa to get a master's in art history. I'm willing to bet she's not going to class. Story 60. Used to have a girlfriend at uni. Here are some bullet points. For some background, this is a crap-hole country, a very class-divided crap-hole country, so either you're poor as hell or rich as hell. You could also be dying middle class, which I'm a part of, but I was studying in one of the most prestigious universities in the country, barely making ends meet, so here's my story. Age 19, she owned her apartment. Parents were divorced, dad had all the money. She ended up convincing her dad she really needed the apartment next door to store stuff. She moved her mom there. Twice a month, she would complain dad's money wasn't enough. She got the equivalent of $1,500 USD bi-weekly. After some argument in which I said I hated to stay late at her apartment, I lived in a different city, like a 2-hour trip away, she convinced her dad to buy her a property in my city. Both her cars had a really small trunk, so she told her dad. He swapped both her cars for SUVs. SUVs were a pain in the butt mileage-wise. Most of our driving was done in a 30-kilometer-an-hour city with traffic jams every day, so she decided to get a smaller car for those times, 90% of the time. When our relationship was dying, yes, there were some perks, but money does not bring happiness. She took me on yet another all-inclusive trip to some awesome island. Sometimes hanging out, she was like, "Oh, you shouldn't wear this tonight," then went to buy clothes for one night and left perfect clothes at the shop because, why would you bother carrying them? We're gonna have fun. You can come tomorrow and buy them again. Going out partying, close group of friends. She would pay for everyone. 15 to 20 people partying hard. In investment, she called it. When we broke up, she threw a tantrum and bought herself some grade A property in Manhattan. Kept teasing me with the, "Come in and live with me. Everything's gonna change" crap. As if it wasn't enough, she bought yet another property at some upscale place. So now she owns like 5 around the globe. Weird flex, but okay. She sent me a Leica Deluxe 3 camera as a chill out gift. Needless to say, I returned it. That crap cost more than my car. I would have been set for life, but screw that. Story 61. I dated this girl for about half a year before we broke up because we were from completely different worlds. We just couldn't find enough in common to keep the relationship going. I knew she was rich, but I didn't know how screw you rich she was. She basically asked me to accompany her on one of her shopping trips and asked me to wear something nice. Apparently it wasn't good enough because the first thing we did on that trip was to go and get me a new shirt and slacks. We walked into one of the shops and basically from the start there was like a butler following us around, and there were waiters walking around handing out flutes of juice and cute little bite-sized cakes. I was completely blown out of the water by then, but it got even better. She basically just walked around the store picking out clothes and handing them to the butler guy. Once she was done, we were escorted into another room where all the clothes she picked were placed onto mannequins, where she would further inspect them. When she had finalized her selection, she basically just signed a piece of paper and walked out. She didn't try on a single piece. I asked her about it, and apparently the shop had her measurements, and the designs she selected would all be custom made to fit her. She didn't even bother checking the prices of any of the pieces. At that point, I was completely overwhelmed and really intimidated that we were dating. And sure enough, we broke up about a month after. It was a really cool experience, though. One I'm sure I will never get to see again. There really is a lot to be said about being from at least similar worlds when you're dating. All the money in the world can't fix incompatibility like that. Often because of all the money in the world, actually. But I simply can't imagine walking into a place, picking things out just to see them on a mannequin, and then be like, yeah, I want this one, this one, this one, and all the rest can go. Like, that is movie parody levels of rich. Horrifying. Story 62. My family is working class, but I ended up at a top 10 university. At least 30% of the students were kids of Fortune 500 CEOs or wealthy international students, most of whom were out of touch with reality. My craziest encounter was with an international hotel heiress, who was a friendly, kind-hearted girl, but thought money was the solution to everything. Her ex got into a fight with her because of their different values. She wanted to make him feel better by renting out a fancy lounge in LA for $100,000 and flying all of his friends out. Needless to say, that did not fix the underlying problem, and their relationship didn't last long. Later, her parents got the bill and threatened to disown her if she kept spending like that. In a way, I pitied her. She didn't have many true friends, and a lot of people took advantage of her because of her loose spending. In fact, she told me of several instances where classmates stole cash and clothes from her. I was close enough with her to tell her to stand up for herself, which she later did, and appreciated by offering me an Hermes Birkin bag, of which she has a dozen. I turned it down, as I think those bags are ugly, and funny enough, she still asks me for financial advice today. I had another classmate whose biggest life struggle was growing up in the poor part of Greenwich, Connecticut. He complained constantly that his parents, quote, only make $1 million a year. He also resented his dad for being laid off during the recession in 2009 and selling their vacation home. Heavens forbid they only live off the $500,000 a year his mom brought home. Poor him. Story 63. Weirdly, it's in a good way. A mate of ours at uni turned out to own a significant chunk of the UK, as in a significant percentage of the landmass. We'd known him for about 2.5 years when he let slip about a car he was looking forward to driving that summer. A couple of us are petrol heads and realized it was like one of 3 left in the world or some crazy crap, so we just asked him outright. I mean, we knew he wasn't poor, and that his folks sure weren't struggling financially, but we realized that maybe he wasn't quite just a bit better off than us. So yeah, turns out he's a viscount, and will be a duke when his dad dies. They own a stupidly large estate and chunk of England. Made no difference to any of us in any way. As I said, he was a long-established mate by that point. Since leaving uni, he still had a normal life, married a normal working-class girl, and works his butt off like everyone else. He'll be a duke one day and not have much cash, but assets worth millions. But yeah, my best rich kid story is about a rich kid we didn't know was rich, and by the time we did, it didn't matter. One of the genuinely nicest and humblest humans I know. Story 64. I went to a Vancouver area high school in the late 2000s with a large, like 85% Chinese immigrant population. Most were pretty nice people, but there was a specific sub-demographic of very rich mainlanders who openly admitted they were only here for Canadian education, passport, and social services. To make it into the upper class in China, you need to be willing to step on everyone in your way, and it shows. You also need to prove your loyalty to the state, which explains the attitude. I hung out with this one kid for a while, and he was always flaunting his wealth. Mind you, he was 16, never earned a penny in his life. All daddy's money. These kinds of kids drove to school in Lambos with the mandatory new driver stickers on the back. One day during lunch break, he wanted to buy bubble tea from the student-operated school store. He opened his wallet and produced a wad of $100 bills, no smaller denominations or pocket change. Apparently, they accepted that and gave him back around $95 in small bills and change. He seemed annoyed they'd given him coins. He turned to me and said, "Why'd they give me this? It's worthless." Now, I'd spent my whole life very poor up to that point, and he knew it. I watched as he took the coins in his hand, slouched over to a garbage bin, and dropped them right in front of me. There were $1 and $2 coins among them. I couldn't believe my eyes. All told, there was maybe $5 there. Then he gives me this big smirk and eventually moved along. I waited for him to round the corner, then reached in to fish out as many as I could. It was more cash than I carried on most days. I went to the cafeteria and bought myself a sandwich. I stopped hanging out with him after that. Story 65. I have a few. One of my best friends that was so shocked that a bank account could go below $1,000 that he called his bank to see how it happened, still couldn't understand how, and was sent to a branch of the bank to talk to the manager of the location. It still took him an hour and a half to understand the, quote, problem. Then later on, the numbers on the ATM turned red when he overdrew the account. He thought he had simply transcended a normal banking and proceeded to brag about it. This same friend as a kid/young teen kept ordering sushi from his family's chef that cost $3,000 a pound, and that was just for one of the ingredients. He ordered over $30,000 of sushi in a week. He also insists on replacing his cell phone as soon as there is a scratch anywhere on it. Not completely unreasonable in itself, but the part that's crazy to me is that even if the scratch is super small on the back of the phone, under the phone case, and can only be seen at a certain angle in the light, he still insists. He also complains that $120,000 is a tight budget to buy a car. Lastly, in an attempt to keep him from talking openly about having money, his mother hired 3 guys in a van to kidnap him. Jump out of a white van, bag over head and all. He was just out on a walk. They tied him to a chair in an empty factory, only to be unmasked to see his mom. I just remembered that he has also mentioned that when he was a kid, he wanted a go-kart track in his family's backyard. So, after a week, they built it, a full-sized track. He said he used it for a week and then never again. My friend also said on the first day of learning to drive, he backed up into one of their G-Wagons. They told him to just keep driving. It'll be fixed by the time they get back. And in a similar story, it took a week to realize a car was backed into their pool and just left there. Okay, as far as rich people teaching their kids a lesson goes, hiring a fake kidnapping team just to convince your kid to not brag about their money or talk about it, that's pretty funny. Do I know, the ethical implications, the psychological? No, but it's pretty funny. Story 66. Just out of college, I worked as an office manager for a nursing home. I handled all aspects of accounting and payroll, as well as liaison for patient families. Self-pay patients, those who did not need financial assistance or were not covered by any insurance, were given access to some luxury options like newspapers, television, telephone, hairdressing, etc. A daughter of one of our long-term self-pay patients came in one day and wanted to have a chat. Of course, I chatted with family members every day, but I had never met this woman before, even though her mother had been there for ages. She brought her mother's bill in with her, and she looked flushed. I asked how I could help her. She was visibly shaking. She asked who had given us the, quote, authority to charge my mother for a newspaper and for a haircut, and she insisted, or lawyers will be involved, that we reimburse her for every such item we have ever dared to charge. Well, your mother authorized it. She asked for these services and we provided them. It's all in the care package we gave you and her upon her admission. And we have these signed order slips going back 6 years. Fire from eyes, steam from ears. She says, "This is my inheritance you're spending." Female dog didn't get a penny back, and next month, her mom got a pedicure as well. Story 67. Can I talk about my rich kid grandparents? My grandfather recently got caught having an affair. No worries, apparently, they still live together. She does his laundry, cooks him dinner, irons his clothes. But now she gets an allowance. $3,000 a weekend to take to the casino. My dad would take her there and she would let him and my stepmother use her free food points to eat while she blew her money away. She won $50,000 one time while they were there. They'd been taking her for a year now and keep her company. She tipped out all of the casino workers and random regulars. Didn't give my dad crap. Sometimes she would even bring out a box of candy to them for taking her. We have a family business that I stopped working at because it was toxic as balls. Constant liens against the company for unpaid taxes, all the while my grandfather takes trips to Italy, Russia, and Spain with his new girlfriend, reaches VIP status at the casino for spending God knows what, gives out bonuses at work that my dad saw nothing of. It's weird. My branch of the family may not be seeing the spoils, but my dad is happy in his small house. I'm happy in my 2-bedroom apartment. I'm glad I'm not insane like them. Story 68. I grew up in a very affluent area, although I was just lower middle class. A friend of a friend's dad had a half-decent car collection. We used to drive through Nellie Gale tearing up lawns in BMWs, 911s, etc. I wasn't there when it happened, but one night the brother found out why the 911 should be respected. It fishtailed out of control and right into the living room wall of a house. It took him several tries before it got unstuck, but the damage was done. Another person's parents made it pretty big before he got old enough to value $1. His parents were middle class, but his dad mortgaged the house to start a mortgage company. Before long, he was making millions per year. Their son, my friend, crashed BMWs, Mercedes, etc. before they got him a fully decked out H1 Humvee. This is when those were fairly new. They lived in a gated community called Coto de Casa, in a house that Madonna gave up on. They owned several famous people's houses, actually. Well, the guy being the jerk he was used to drive the Hummer down sidewalks, smashing into light poles, street signs, etc. He would just fix it up after, including custom rims, motor, etc. Spoiled crap. A girl I went to high school with used to toss her Sony Walkman away when the batteries died. She did all the rich kid and mean girl crap you see in movies. Her house parties, though, were legendary when her parents weren't home. She asked for a baby blue Nissan 300 ZX when they first came out. They gave her a pearlescent white one. She lost it, so they bought her a baby blue 1970s Ford LTD, and she had to drive that for the rest of the year until she graduated, or not drive at all. I'm never impressed when I meet rich and famous people, and my wife can't figure out why. But hey, they're just people, and generally their kids are jerks. Fun to hang out with, but will throw you under the bus so they can maintain their lifestyle at any cost. Story 69. I don't know how rich kid this is, but it still demonstrated a difference between the classes. Context. My boyfriend's parents are still together and quite well off due to very hard work and good life choices, so things have been easier for him than most. His schooling was completely paid for, and he was encouraged to live at home while he was at college, so he acquired no housing or food debt during that time. My parents are divorced and chose not to pay for any of my schooling. But due to them making enough combined, I didn't qualify for government schooling assistance, so I had to pay everything myself. Plus, I had to move to another city for schooling, so I couldn't live at home. He is not a rich kid, but we do definitely have some different life experiences. A couple of years ago, a coworker's father was dying. She had to take random days off work because he would take a turn and then recover, that kind of thing. I was talking to my fairly new boyfriend at the time about how I felt for her and how she was stressed because she wanted to be with her dad, but she was out of vacation days and needed to work because she's basically a single parent to her son. He seemed astounded that anyone would choose work over staying by a dying parent's bedside. I agreed with him that obviously that would be ideal, but unfortunately not everyone has the money to do that. Bills don't stop because your parent is dying, and sometimes one shift can be the difference between being able to pay a bill or get groceries or not. He very quickly replied, "Well, then you get your family to help you out." I just paused and replied, "What if your family doesn't have money to help you? What if they're living paycheck to paycheck as well?" He went very quiet, like he hadn't considered this could be an issue. Eventually, he replied, "Wow, that would be awful." He's a very hard worker and earns every dime he makes, and he's very willing to listen to other people's perspectives. But occasionally, he'll say something that shows he grew up very differently from some people and doesn't realize it. Story 70. Went to a university where some students' families had bought their students admission. Freshman year, I went to my dorm room on the 4th floor at the end of a hallway. Saw a pair of hands on the bottom edge of the window. Checked it out to find a young man hanging outside the window. Watched him crawl back in. When I asked him what he was doing there, he said that at his very wealthy prep school, they had told some wealthy international kid, a prince's son, that this was the custom in the US for greeting the pizza delivery guy, and he always wondered how it felt. No respect for life, not even his own. This was the grandson of one of the most famous, wealthy names in the country, who in fact did donate a new building to gain the students admission. I'm not sure he ever went to class. Sophomore year, I checked on him to find him and some cronies betting what today would be about $330 on on the cut of card, all night long. I tried explaining to them how unbold this was from a statistical perspective and that there was no skill. Couldn't get them to understand. It wasn't so much that he threw money around or anything, it was just that the thought processes were so off or not normal about money or life. I genuinely worried about him for lack of all common sense reasons, and this made me a little fond of him. But I mostly avoided him because I wanted to educate him about real life too badly, and I didn't have the time. I also had the innate sense that he had no ability to attach to friends, and I take friendship very seriously. I think he was done with the college experience after 3 semesters. Called himself by a fake first name, so people were less likely to connect who he really was. He wasn't a bad guy, just not fully human by a long shot. Story 71. Does it still count if the family was poor? Both parents working many jobs with long hours and still needing social assistance? If so, my ex-BFF of just shy of 10 years. At first, since we met at age 9, I figured he was just a brat / jealous of new baby sister / upset at having to switch schools middle of the year. He was mouthy to his parents or anybody who tried to tell him what to do. But again, my 9-year-old brain rationalized it to him being a kid and that he would grow out of it. We didn't really start hanging out outside of school until I was 11 or so, and my other best friend had moved out of town. I noticed he was still mouthy and disrespectful and figured, okay, he's a jerk, but he means well, as he was a decent enough friend and cared when it mattered. I was jealous because he always had a cell phone or the newest Nintendo, but knowing his parents were poor, I figured they were secondhand or borrowed from better off relatives. By the time we were 13 or 14, I only kept him around because he was now my only friend. Didn't realize till years after the friendship ended that he had driven off any and all friends I had besides him so he could have his favorite victim all to himself. He was and likely still is very abusive in every way and should be avoided at all costs. He had a new laptop, Xbox, phone, while his little sisters had a junky, how the hell is it working, N64, and cheap, held together with duct tape GameCube. Those were still new-ish at the time. I asked how he managed to save up for all his tech, and he just said, "I didn't. Mother and father bought it." I was floored. He was dressed in name brands while his parents and sisters wore secondhand clothing, the mother often stitching worn clothes together to make them last longer. If the parents tried to parent him, he'd scream the house down. All the kids had ADD, ADHD, and autism. My ex-friend had made his sisters worse because they mimicked his every action, and I later learned he was abusive to them as well, and that he had an older brother that literally convinced his parents to legally give him to the grandparents to avoid him. He'd bite hard enough to break skin and attack anybody who told him no. He didn't understand why I didn't tell my parents to screw off when they wanted me to do chores and tried to get me to. I never. My mother would have shot me. By the time we were 16, I was so afraid of him, I virtually became his maid, and often took the brunt of his anger to save his mom and sisters the torment. His parents were split by then. My reward? Well, I got to spend loads of time with him away from my somewhat abusive mother. He was my, quote, safe place, and he knew it. He'd often buy me jewelry, my favorite foods, and despite saying he didn't like women, he'd often spend money on me, hair dye, books, art supplies, and treat me like he would a partner. If something he had broke, he'd fix it just enough to work and give it to his sisters to fight over, knowing that they would total it, and he'd just complain to his mother until she bought him what he wanted. Though he wouldn't sell me the consoles or laptops when he mentioned wanting a new one. His system was get thing, keep until he gets his worth from it or a newer model is available, complain how thing is boring, break or fix just enough to blame sisters, get new thing, and repeat. Around when he'd say he was sick of it, I'd offer to buy it from him. He would refuse or insist I just bickered at my parents to buy me one. The friendship ended via Facebook because he couldn't be bothered to walk the 5 minutes to my house, and when I went to his, he'd send his mom and sisters to convince me to leave when we were 18. I'd gotten sick of his abuse and had found out he had tried sleeping with my girlfriend. But he managed to convince everyone I was at fault, so when he left, any mutual friends we had went with him. Looking back, trash took itself out. He still has all the new tech he could ever want and thinks he's better than everyone else. But I won, if winning is even possible. How? His brother cut him out years ago but still contacts me. His dad is a homeless druggie but still greets me and treats me like he did his own kids. His mom remarried, took the sisters and moved to the States to live on a farm with her new husband. She couldn't force him to go with her, so as a final act of charity, her new husband paid for the house so he wouldn't be homeless. But he's on assistance for paying bills. She cut ties except for a message here and there. But when she came to visit, she visited me as well, and upon finding out I was trans, she offered to let me move with her and the girls, who, by the way, are doing so much better since leaving their brother behind. But my family refused, since they don't like this family or don't know I'm trans because they're bigots. And yes, while I'm on assistance, I'm living at home and looking for work and trying to go to uni. I also have a social life, friends, and am bettering myself. He lives in that house with his cats, boyfriend, and every so often contacts me and tries to lure me back to him. He promises that he's changed and still loves me. Come on, man. I know I'm stupid. I'm not that stupid, though. Story 72. Watching a self-proclaimed Jewish American princess tell off her parents while on the Auschwitz tour and have a literal temper tantrum because they wouldn't let her go shopping after a quick trip through that day. They wanted to teach her about it and she wasn't having it. She was screaming that they were from Portugal and that she didn't care about, quote, freaking Germany or freaking Poland, and that she was bored. She also threw a tantrum on her 16th birthday at school in front of everyone because she got a silver Lexus, but she wanted a black one. Told her parents off, and it was brand new. What's worse is she got the one she wanted to. Every party she had ended with her house getting destroyed, with her collapsing and crying, and then she'd come in acting like it never happened on Monday. Her parents were pushovers and siblings were all chill and super smart. She is still a stage 5 drama queen on Facebook too. Divorced 4 times already. She always interrupts everyone to change the topic back to her, and her parents bought her a few houses and her kids are all just like her. Story 73. Just out of school, I got a job at a family-owned engineering firm. The dad was the president, his wife was the HR director, his oldest son was my boss and VP. After a couple of years, his youngest son was in his 3rd year of college, which took him 6 years to reach, and was hired to work in civil engineering. He was assigned to me. I trained him and taught him what I knew about design. I was promoted to assistant project manager. Just before he graduated, he was promoted to project manager, and I was moved from his older brother to working for him, because I could run the team and projects while he's still in school, and make sure everything went right. He hadn't even graduated yet, hadn't taken the EIT exam. He came in after his promotion and said, "I'm your boss now. Do you have a problem with that?" I nearly quit. Instead, I asked his older brother if I could come back to his team. He didn't want to lose me in the first place, so he agreed. Story 74. Oh dear. I could write a book about this. I went to a very good and well-known private boarding school. If you're from the UK, you would probably recognize it. 98% of my classmates were extremely wealthy. My ex, not being an exception. He was from a very well-established and old English family. Dating him, there was never a dull moment to say the least. Maybe not the craziest encounter, but definitely the most memorable one was when we started dating. I took him to a popular fast food chain, think McDonald's or Burger King. I was running late and didn't want him to wait for me too long, so I told him to order for himself and wait for me inside. As I walk in, I see him standing by the door looking as confused as ever. Mind, I was running late a good 15 minutes at this point. I ask him why he's waiting by the door. He looks at me with a poker face and tells me that he, quote, is still waiting to be seated and cannot find the host. As it turns out, it was his first time at a fast food place, and he had never been to a place that didn't have a host or hostess. After I explained to him that this kind of place doesn't have a host, we make our way further inside. After a number of other incidents, such as being bewildered that there is no table service and wine menu, we finally make our way to a table. At this point, I'm already quite amused, but it's not where the story ends. We put our trays down and he looks at me expectantly. I'm about to ask what's wrong when this comes out of his mouth. "OP, where do we get the cutlery?" I look at him, look at our burgers and fries, and back to him. Not quite sure if he was pulling my leg, but realizing that just a moment ago he expected to be seated and given a wine menu, I calmly, suppressing my laugh really, explain there is no cutlery to be found, and that he needs to use his hands. Talk about being out of touch with reality. Story 75. I don't know if this fits exactly, but I would still like to contribute. So, I was the rich kid in the situation. Before the crisis, my parents were very well off, and since they were married, they have had their own very big house, so I'd never moved in my life until I left for uni. Anyway, I'm talking with my French prof, and she says something about a 2-room apartment. So I go, how the hell do you live in a 2-room apartment? She's getting very defensive on this and saying that not everyone lives in a huge house like me and blah blah blah. And I'm saying, yes, I get that, but I still don't get how it's possible. After a while, I realize these two things. She's talking about bedrooms, not just rooms in general. People count rooms by taking into account the walls and doors separating them, not the use of the room. I was thinking, okay, you have a bedroom and a kitchen, but where do you pee and bathe? In the sink? Now, I know this is very ignorant, but again, consider, I must have been about 10, and I didn't know how the housing market worked because my family had never moved. I didn't know that 2-room apartment meant 2-bedroom apartment, nor that having everything in one open space was considered as one room. She also refused to explain, because she immediately assumed I was a spoiled brat, which, well, I was, just not to that extent. OP, if someone mentioned the apartments you'd find in places like Japan, 10-year-old you would have lost your mind. Those are actual one-room apartments. Story 76. There's this girl I was best friends with in middle school. We both bought a season pass to this theme park because they had massive discounts for students, so it was great. We used to go almost every weekend. Let's call her Plum. So Plum is loaded. She has a governess following her around who gets bought a new full-price ticket every time we go to the theme park to give you an idea of how loaded she is. One day she got real tired of it and told the governess to wait outside. She had about $300 to $400 pocket money. Plum, being a 12-year-old, kept buying everything she saw. Popcorn, doesn't finish it and throws it away. Chicken, doesn't finish, throws it away. Churros, doesn't finish it. You get the idea. She spent all that money on food she didn't finish, and toys she wasn't even able to carry, all in less than 6 hours. At the end, she wanted to keep buying stuff and realized she had no more money, and no governess to ask for money. So Plum starts crying, like bawling out, complaining about being broke and how poor she is now. It was crazy. I was just happy I kept getting free food from what she didn't finish because it was also overpriced. No 12-year-old needs $400 in their wallet. Story 78. I went to high school in a rich neighborhood. It was far away, but thank God for my mother who was willing to go that far and sacrifice that much each day to make sure I was getting a better education. From the neighborhood I grew up in, I thought one several years old vehicle was the standard for a family. Maybe two if neither of the parents were stay-at-home. So when I went to high school, I was astounded that all the houses around us had 3-car garages, not including cars parked out on the driveway. Of course, they weren't old either. Each was a brand new muscle car. I have 2 stories that are relatively the same. One is that a guy in my class got a brand new Mustang to drive each year. Like, he only had his permit, not even his license yet, and he was skirting around our school's parking lot and laughing all the way. He and I were fairly close, and I was astounded when he said he was middle class. I was actually at a loss for words and just couldn't reply. The second story is of another girl in my class. She was adamant she was not wealthy. Meanwhile, on Snapchat, she would show off her dad's 3rd new boat. I mean, seriously, who needs more than one boat? Where do you even store more than one boat? Anyway, I kinda grew this animosity towards her, which was completely unwarranted. She was nice, I just couldn't get over how ignorant she was. As it turns out, the guy and girl I just talked about are seemingly happily dating, and have been in a relationship for a while, so go you guys. Story 79. I once saw a rich kid in a brand new sports car pull out of a CVS parking lot, across 3 lanes of traffic towards the far left turn lane, and drove straight into an old pickup truck, loaded with work equipment that was definitely there first. Mom and I were coming home from an appointment with our doctor and saw all of this happen from a different side of the intersection. When the light changed, no one stayed to witness. Mom and I saw this little old black man get out of the truck and we knew what we had to do, so we stuck around. I got out and approached the scene while Mom waited. Rich kid screams at old man, "He hit me!" and saying it was all the guy's fault. Richie ended up screaming at me for saying what I'd seen, especially the part about his girlfriend trying to hide in a different part of the parking lot and pretending to be a witness to blame the old dude. They really did that. The county cops that showed were both awesome and neither of them were taking any of this kid's crap. I remember eventually hearing him break down a bit and cry about how he just got it and his dad was gonna destroy him. Oh, it was a day to remember. Story 80. Back in high school in year 11, there was this kid who was about 5'9" with orange hair. He came into the first week of the school year with a $2,500 gaming laptop. Along with the laptop, his Steam account had 600 plus games and many transactions based on his inventory. Teachers got very suspicious. The kid didn't like doing a lot of work, the typical stuff. You could almost say that the parents might sue the school if he failed, or went to detention after school. Another part of this story is his attitude with online or LAN gaming. You see, we would use the computers sometimes to play classic games like COD 1, NFS, UG2, or CSS, the usual games that school computers would support. Whenever he would die or lose in a race, he would change the rules, add restrictions, anything to make him have the advantage over everyone else. You'd be lucky to even be considered a friend of his since he never opens up much, but that's pretty much it. Story 81. I moved in with a guy I had known when I first moved out of my parents' house. This guy was 30 years old and had a master's degree in education, but refused to get a job. Instead, he lived off his parents and sat around smoking reefer all day. He was depressed but refused to do anything for himself. We worked at a summer camp in the summertime, but everyone hated him for being a spoiled piece of crap. He did so many things, but what comes to mind is him having a meltdown over not getting his way for some inane program for the camp. and he threw his very expensive Apple notebook across a room and smashed it. When everyone, mostly teens and guys in their early 20s of modest and low-income households, freaked out about it, he just said his dad would buy him a new one. His parents were good people too and well aware of the problem, but felt trapped in enabling him because he was their son. They knew they had caused the problem, but felt he would just flounder if he was cut off. Last I heard, he was in and out of watch for taking his own life because the camp's leadership refused to let him continue working there. It was his only goal in life to be a program director at this camp, and he could not cope. Also, one time, a very expensive pair of polarized Ray-Bans he owned had a single scratch on a lens, and he refused to ever wear them again. He made his parents buy him new ones. I was like, damn, I'll take them then. 6 years later, they're the nicest pair of sunglasses I've ever owned. He contacted me a couple years ago asking me how I coped with the depression in the past, and I was dealing with a lot at the time, and I wanted to cut him down. But it took my full force of will and compassion to gently tell him I was currently in counseling, and that if you actually take it seriously and want to get better, it can help. He didn't like that answer, but screw it. To me, it just demonstrated that independence and self-actualization is a learned trait and needs to be instilled early. Story 82. Not my encounter specifically, but one of my past roommates said that one of the boys who lived on her hall our freshman year came from an extremely rich family in Washington, D.C. Dad was a politician. After a couple weeks of initial partying and being a college student, one of his roommates was finally like, "Dude, you should start to clean up your mess around here." And this guy was like, "Oh, I don't know how to clean. If I pay you, will you do it for me?" Like, what? You don't know how to clean? Turns out he'd lived with a neat freak of a mom and then a housekeeper on top of that. Was literally never taught to clean up after himself. His parents ended up having to hire him a cleaning service of his own to come and clean up his entire dorm. And before long, none of the 4 boys in his dorm were cleaning up after themselves. They planned to get an apartment together the next year, and although I don't remember the details, there was some kind of huge confrontation between them, and the rich guy ended up dropping out and going home. Yikes. My encounter, though not as crazy as the first, was going to do my laundry after 2 weeks at college, and I literally had to guide a group of boys in the entire process. We're talking didn't even know how to separate your colors from your whites, thought you put bleach in your colors, thought you put scent beads where you put the detergent and dryer sheets in the vent. I tried to be as nice as possible, but I was like, you guys have really never done laundry before or even watched someone do laundry? Story 83. Okay, to preface this, I go to Oxford Uni, which is why I've met so many of these weirdos. I can't think of any, huge stories because, to be honest, most people try to hide their wealth, but these are just tidbits that stand out. 1. There's a boys' boarding school called Harrow, which is obscenely expensive. I've never had a good experience with a Harrow boy since their overriding mentality seems to be that they can buy the right to anyone's genitals. One threw a tantrum at me because he bought me drinks all night. I mean, I really didn't ask, and then didn't bang him. Another has been harassing a girl I know for a full 2 years because she turned him down. 2. Nice rich boy I know bought about 30 of us a meal each, and functionally unlimited wine at a nice restaurant, as well as unlimited cocktails at a bar, and then as much champagne and other drinks as we wanted in the club all night. He's really nice, but also seemed to think this was normal. 3. A girl in my course is going all the way back home for a wedding in the middle of term, flying to Singapore. Rich people seem to view plane tickets in the way normal people view train tickets. Another girl I know was telling me about this hilarious prank her friend pulled. Her friend logged onto her dad's account and canceled the girl's flight to the UK, booking one to Saudi Arabia instead. Did not seem angry with this friend, found it funny. 4. There's the old chestnut of students here burning money in front of homeless people. Wish I was kidding. 5. Another girl I know basically throws a full music festival, named after herself of course, for her birthday every year. Books out land, hires musicians, everyone camps out there, etc. She recently quit a fancy job because it was poorly paid. She was making more than either of my parents. 6. Every year there's this event called the Piers Gav. It's a, quote, radical queer ball, which in this case means a coke-fueled group session. It's invite only, has separate massive tents for drugs, banging, and music. People get really annoyed if you imply it's exclusive or elitist. 7. They all think they're 100% more deserving of things than the rest of the country. If you point out they've had huge advantages in the sense that they've attended schools that cost more than most people's yearly household incomes, they will unironically and confidently tell you to your face that they deserve it because their parents worked harder. Like, oh, thanks, Cecilia. I'll tell that to my dad who works 72 hours a week. Story 84. This is the story of Mike, the saddest and most oblivious rich piece of crap I've ever met. I was working as an intern on a really big US Senate campaign about 10 years ago. Getting a full-time job on a campaign like that is huge, and we have something like 40 interns competing for 3 full-time staffer positions. Donors often give money with the contingency that their children will get jobs on the campaign. We were about a week from the announcement of which interns will go full-time, and in walks a donor's son. We'll call him Mike. Just to give some context, I had been working for free for 4 months, 60 hours a week, just to have a chance at being a staffer. The pay is garbage when you get hired, something like $18K a year, but the job exposes you to incredibly powerful people and sets you up for the rest of your life. So in walks Mike, and from his last name, everyone knows exactly who he is. His family is worth a sickening amount of money, something close to $1 billion. You would think that this kid, who already has a strike against him for being a donor's son, would try to play nice and make friends. No. So all the interns stay in 2 big rooms and work at really large tables. Spending 60 hours a week with the same people and not making any money tends to bring people really close together. We would share lunches, help each other out, and generally have a great time together working on really tedious stuff. Mike walks in day 1 in a 3-piece suit carrying a giant cooler. We all introduce ourselves and he literally looks around the room and says, "Okay." Within an hour, he's attempting conversation, talking about how he scuffed his shoes on the way over and only trusts the cobbler in Italy to polish it out, complaining that domestic cobblers don't know how to properly shine a shoe. Lunch comes around and we learn what the cooler is for. Mike has food shipped to him from France every day. Apparently, his family friend is an ambassador to France, and with a diplomatic immunity can have food shipped to him. As I'm eating my broke PB&J, Mike busts out a 3-course French meal on the table, way more food than one person could handle. After nibbling on the food for an hour, he throws out about $300 worth of untouched cheeses and meats without offering it to anyone. After eating, he asks the Indian girl next to me if she can eat her leftover curry in another room, because the smell upsets him. Day 2. Mike's father was so proud of his son actually putting in a hard day's work that he buys him a brand new Rolex to celebrate. Mike walks around the room showing everyone his watch, which is covered in an inappropriate amount of diamonds, but he explicitly tells everyone to only look, don't touch it. At this point, I feel bad for Mike. He doesn't know how to talk to normal people, and maybe he's just misunderstood. I try to strike up a conversation, but Mike is completely disinterested. I asked him where he's from, and he literally is yawning in my face, giving the most minimal answers possible. It's clear he has no intention of talking with the gutter trash. After another lavish French lunch that goes in the garbage, Mike decides he's put in a hard day's work and leaves. Day 3. I'm dating another intern on the campaign, but no one in the office knows it. We meet for coffee down the block every morning and walk in separately. On this morning, Mike sees us together and smirks as he orders his coffee. I get in early, per usual, and everyone is saying the announcements come today to see who gets the first staff positions. We're all speculating on who's getting hired and where they're going. Mike speaks up and claims he will be hired today, speculating he'll be assisting with the strategy department. There is no strategy department, and Mike has worked a total of 5 hours since we arrived. I understand the donors' families get special treatment, but the campaign manager has made it abundantly clear in the past that the only way on the campaign is hard work. Doesn't matter who your daddy is. I get called into the campaign manager's office and told I have a job. I immediately start crying. Hundreds of hours of free work for the past few months, and it all worked out. I am elated. I collect myself and gather my things from the intern room. I receive congratulations from everyone, but Mike is staring me down looking super mad. He loses it. He starts packing away his things and saying his father will never contribute to this candidate again. He calls me and the other staffers talentless hacks and says he can't stand another minute in this smelly office. The campaign manager hears the commotion and enters the room. He asks Mike if he can speak with him, and Mike keeps repeating, "You're done! You're done!" The manager tries to calm him down and says he wants to speak with him privately. The manager's office is right next to the intern door and the walls are thin. We're all leaning on the wall listening. The manager tells him he needs 30 days of good work out of him and he has a job. He says he values the contribution of his family, but jobs here are earned. Mike storms out of the office huffing and puffing. He walks back in the intern room furious, points at me and says, OP is having an affair with one of your interns. I thought you'd like to know that. Thanks for outing me, bro. He storms out of the office. The manager shakes his head and business resumes as normal. We hear later his dad apologizes for his son's behavior and continues to contribute to our campaign. Freaking rich kids. The icing on the cake here is the dude's dad apologizing for his behavior. That's how you know that kid is just a spoiled brat. It's also nice to know that the father wasn't on the kid's side. Because, being worth almost $1 billion and being a garbage human is a bad combination. It's nice to know the father has some values and morals at least. And the threat of oh, my dad will pull funding, and then him not pulling funding? Oh, beautiful. Screw you, kiddo. Anyway, that's the last story for today. Have you ever encountered any rich kids? How'd it go? Let me know in the comments. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.